Everyone, please take your seats. Everyone would please take your seats. We're being live streamed. This is the third briefing of Maryland House Judiciary Committee on issues related to juvenile justice. It's December the 5th at 1 o'clock. And we have a number of people who are going to speak with us today. With love in my heart, I will say, because it is that time of year when we all get a little bit busier and these hours are precious, that I would like to underline, looking at one person in particular, that people should ask questions and not make long speeches. With love in my heart, you need to make sure your questions are directed to the people who are going to be speaking today. And when we get to the part of this program where we're going to hear from individual programs, they're all a little bit different. So the goal is to hear how their programs work and not necessarily deal with the larger policy issues. But I know that probably won't stop people from asking questions about the larger policy issues. But I just wanted to gently and lovingly direct people to try to stay on questions and a little less speechifying today. And with that hopeful note, okay, this is the third briefing that we've had. After this briefing, as we get closer to session, there are a number of pieces of legislation that are being considered and that will continue and will be introduced into the legislature in the next session. Today, we're going to be hearing first from the National Conference of State Legislatures, from Kate Bryan, Ann Teagan, and Jessica Guarino, who can talk to us about what other states are doing in this area. Then we're going to hear from Judge Stam from St. Mary's County, who's going to talk about the judiciary and their role involved, connected to juvenile justice issues. And then, as I mentioned, we're going to hear from 6 different organizations from different parts of the state, who again all attack this issue in different ways. And we'll hear from each one of them for about 10 minutes each. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with NCSL. They're on virtually, and whoever.
That's correct.
Begin.
All right, if it's all right, Chairman Clippinger, if I may share my screen.
That's great. Thank you very much.
Just give me a moment, please. Oh, it looks like the host says disabled participant.
It's already up. We've already got you up here.
All right. In that case, let me just switch over and grab my notes then.
That's perfectly fine. You will let you grab your notes and just let us know when you'd like us to move to the next slide, and that'll be fine.
All right. I think I am. About ready here. All right, I am ready to start when you are.
Go right ahead.
Okay, so good afternoon, Chairman Clippinger and members of the committee. I want to thank you all for inviting me to speak with you today. My name is Kate Bryan. I am a policy specialist with the National Conference of State Legislatures in the Criminal and Civil Justice Program. And while I cover a number of topics under the umbrella of criminal and civil justice, one of my areas of focus is juvenile justice. And today I'm going to be speaking about a number of policy reforms and policy approaches at both the state and municipal levels. But before I get going, in the main part of today's discussion, I would like to just start by saying that NCSL is a bipartisan organization, and our members include all the legislators and legislative staff in the 50 states and U.S. territories. And as a bipartisan organization, we do strive to provide unbiased research, training, and technical assistance. And really at our core, we aim to help strengthen state legislatures. If I can go to slide 3, please. So before we really get going, I just wanted to provide more or less a roadmap of what we will be looking at today. As mentioned, I'm going to be touching on a number of recent juvenile justice policy reforms and approaches. But more specifically, we are going to look at 5 areas. I'm going to start just with the research, as this does provide a good context for where some of these reforms come from. We'll look at age of jurisdiction, due process, services for justice-involved youth, and we will end with probation. Next slide, please. I know many people have heard about the research, but again, I think this is a good place to start because it really does provide a bit of some background as to where some of the policy changes from the federal all the way down to the municipal level has come from. So really putting a lot of research into a nutshell, the main takeaway is that young people are more susceptible to high risk-taking behavior, as well as peer pressure as a result of a brain that is still maturing. And again, this research has been incorporated in policies from the federal level all the way down to counties. Next slide, please. So here we see some landmark Supreme Court decisions that has really made, or that these decisions have really made a distinction between juveniles and their adult counterparts. Next slide, please. Specifically, in Roper v. Simmons, Justice Anthony Kennedy, who was writing for the majority of the court, concluded that young people have a relative lack of control of their immediate surroundings. Yet by the same token, because their brain is still maturing, they also have a greater chance of outgrowing behaviors that might not conform with the law. And this ruling really did help to set the groundwork for subsequent state-level policy changes, particularly as they apply to a young person's age and the notion of culpability. Next slide, please. So here we will start with age of juvenile court jurisdiction. This is an area of policy that has gained really a tremendous amount of legislative momentum over the past several years. Next slide, please. When we start discussing the age of jurisdiction of a juvenile court, we're really looking at 2 things, the minimum age as well as the maximum age. And in recent years, legislation has been introduced or enacted that look at both what is called the floor, so the lowest threshold age for juvenile court jurisdiction, as well as the ceiling or the maximum age of juvenile court jurisdiction. Today, however, I would like to focus on the minimum age because that's really not only where we see the most statutory variation between the states and territories, pardon me, but also this is where we tend to get a lot of questions as to what happens when a young person might be or is statutorily exempt from juvenile court jurisdiction. Next slide, please. So here I wanted to include this infographic because it really provides a nice visual as to what the national landscape looks like. As you can see in the states that do specify a minimum age, so those are the states highlighted by the blue tiles. The minimum age that is most common for juvenile court jurisdiction, or the the most common minimum age for juvenile court jurisdiction in states that do specify one in statute is 10 years old. Of course, regardless of the age that is specified in the juvenile code, there are exceptions. And those exceptions usually are when the young person is suspected of having committed a serious violent offense or a serious sexual offense. Next slide, please. So again, now that we've kind of gotten a look at what the national landscape looks like, I want to return to the question of what happens when age might not allow for formal processing. Next slide. So some states have either included alternatives to formal processing, have introduced the use of screening tools, or have built in additional statutory exemptions to what is typically found across the country. So those being the serious violent crimes or a serious sexual offense. So if we look at Delaware, for example, within the bill that raised the minimum threshold age to 12, there was also language specifying that if that young person committed an offense or suspected to having committed an offense that involved a firearm, that person would then fall under the purview of the juvenile court. And some of those offenses that are enumerated in statute include things like robbery in the first and second degree, or carjacking in the first and second degree. Next slide, please. So in addition to age boundaries, lawmakers and other juvenile justice stakeholders have really been looking at ways to increase due process protections for young people from the moment they are arrested for a suspected offense and taken into custody. Now, broadly speaking, these protections have been in the form of prohibition on the use of deceptive tactics like law enforcement. So that might be something akin to a promise of leniency in order to solicit more information from the young person during the questioning. The second area that's gained a lot of attention is when and who and to what extent does an adult, whether that be a parent, a legal guardian, or legal counsel, when does that adult need to be contacted and informed that a young person has been taken into custody and is either currently undergoing questioning or will undergo questioning? Again, there's a lot of difference between states, but we'll take a look at some of these state approaches. Next slide, please. So for example, only 4 states require parental consent prior to questioning. But if you look at these laws, there actually is a fair amount of difference between the 4 states that do have this requirement. So looking at Iowa, for example, in addition to the age specification, the waiver of counsel provision applies only if the suspected offense is a serious or aggravated misdemeanor or felony under the state's criminal code. If you look at Maine and Utah, those laws appear to have broader application. Next slide, please. So here we see that in most states, parental presence is considered but not required when it comes to a young person's waiver of Miranda rights. And in a smaller number of states, so looking at that far right column, we see that only 6 states require that a parent or other interested adult, so legal guardian or legal counsel, must be present up to the age of majority. Next slide, please. This is a slide that I just included a couple state examples in which in statute, waiver of counsel, or excuse me, that these are a few statutory examples of approaches to parental consent of questioning and waiver of counsel during juvenile custodial interrogation. And we can not spend a lot of time on this one. I just wanted to put it here for reference for everyone. Next slide, please. So now we're going to look at some services for justice-involved youth. So for young people that do end up in the juvenile justice system, states have been exploring ways to provide alternatives to traditional legal sanctions. Today we'll look at 2 examples, the first being from Kentucky and the second being from South Dakota. There are also counties and municipalities that have been looking at alternatives to formal court processing. But just to be respectful of everyone's time today, I wanted to show two states and look at those two states a little bit more closely. Next slide. So as mentioned, Kentucky is one of those states that has enacted a relatively comprehensive juvenile justice reform bill. That's Senate Bill 200, and this was passed in 2014. And what this bill aimed to do was to reduce the use of out-of-home placements and then reinvest the money that would be saved on beds for detention or rehabilitation into community-based sanction and treatment programs. There was also an emphasis on directing the most intensive resources to youth that were deemed to be higher risk or higher needs or have committed more serious offenses. The bill also requires data and oversight to track the implementation and outcomes of these policies. And we'll also take a little bit closer look at the fiscal incentive program that is used to establish community-based sanctions and treatment programs. Next slide. So before looking more closely at the pathways in which a young person who does become system involved might take through the court system or to diversion, I wanted to provide a little bit of data, albeit this is from 2018, but this was a great report put together by the Urban Institute that shows generally the percentage and types of offenses that were being referred to intake. So what we see here is that more than half of those offenses were either status offenses or first-time misdemeanor offenses. Next slide, please. Well, I apologize, this did not come through and blocks out basically half of this flow chart, but I will share with you what is at the bottom here. So this is essentially the justice system pathways through the Kentucky Juvenile Justice Court. So if a young person is suspected or is found to have committed a first-time misdemeanor offense, the bill mandates that that young person actually goes directly to diversion as an alternative to formal court processing. So the legislation also expands diversion eligibility for certain subsequent misdemeanor offenses, as well as first-time felony complaints. So where this big yellow highlighted block is, that is where you would normally see diversion and the different pathways that a young person can take there. And I wanted to bring attention to the FAIR teams, which is a team that was established by Senate Bill 200, and what it stands for is a Family Accountability Intervention and Response Team. And any young person who is eligible and then referred to diversion falls kind of within the scope of this team. And what this team does is it is comprised of up to 15 members, and they include a court-designated specialist, as well as representatives from community-based service programs, the county's attorney's office, representatives from public schools, law enforcement, as well as a representative from the Division of Community-Based Services. Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the integral parts of the legislation is data collection and oversight. Next slide. So taking information that was made available by Kentucky's Administrative Office of the Courts, as well as the state's Department of Juvenile Justice, the Crime and Justice Institute analyzed data from 2013, so that's going to be 1 year prior to the enactment of Senate Bill 200. as well as all the way up to 2016. So that's 2 years after implementation. And while there's a lot of information on this infographic, I did want to call attention to the fact that the data showed that 90% of diversions were successful, and out-of-home placements declined. And basically what that allowed the state to do is to take that money that resulted from 3 facility closures. You'll see that on that farmost right-hand column, in which 82 beds were no longer needed, 82 detention beds, and put that money back into those more intensive community-based programs for young people who were deemed to be high risk or higher needs. Next slide, please. So next we'll look at South Dakota. Similar to Kentucky, South Dakota enacted a pretty comprehensive juvenile reform bill. This was in 2015, Senate Bill 73. And basically this legislation came about after a juvenile justice reinvestment initiative work group got together and made suggestions for policy improvements to improve the outcomes for juveniles while also doing this at a lower cost. You'll see on the slide that the average annual cost for an out-of-home placement for one young person was just under $60,000. And I believe, going back to Kentucky, don't 100% quote me here, but I think there was the average cost for an out-of-home placement in Kentucky was somewhere around $85,000 a year. So much like Kentucky, this legislation aimed to expand access to community-based alternatives while focusing resources on those juveniles who were deemed to be a public safety risk. Now, going back to our conversation earlier, well, what do you do if a young person doesn't statutorily meet the age requirement to fall under the purview of the juvenile court? What this bill did was built in a provision, because in South Dakota, the minimum age of court jurisdiction for a young person is 10, that if that young person committed an offense and had no prior adjudications, then that young person would fall under the purview of CHINS, or child in need of supervision. And again, similar to Kentucky, we see that this legislation also had a strong provision related to oversight and data collection. Next slide, please. Here we also see a fiscal incentive program. So what the law required was that the Department of Corrections develop an incentive program for counties that would basically encourage the use of diversion. And when a young person successfully completed a court-ordered diversion program, that county was reimbursed at a rate of $250 per successful diversion. Next slide, please. Here we have a graph from the state's Juvenile Justice Oversight Council's 2022 annual report. And what this reflects is generally the types of petitions filed by type each year. So here we see that basically every year, the majority of petitions filed were for misdemeanor offenses. So given that these were misdemeanor offenses, the majority of these were likely eligible for diversion. Next slide, please. Here, again, we have more blockout. This was meant to highlight, not to obstruct your view of what is on this slide. But what is behind those highlighted marks is essentially that as of 2022, since the inception of the fiscal incentive program, the state has paid counties just over $2 million for almost 11,000 successful diversion program completions. Next slide, please. Another element of Senate Bill 73 was an appropriation of just under $3 million to fund various community-based treatment programs. And The legislation also required that, or requires that various state agencies, such as social services, corrections, and the judicial system, identify which community-based treatment programs will best support at-risk and justice-involved youth. Many of the programs and services for juveniles referred to treatment do fall under the South Dakota Department of Social Services, and I have some examples of what those services are up here on the slide. And not only is the Social Services Department responsible for administering these programs, but they are also responsible for collecting treatment data and providing that to the Oversight Council, as well as the Department of Corrections. Next slide, please. Here, I wanted to mention that in addition to some of the services that we saw on the previous slide for those who are going into a diversion program, there is an additional service called Systems of Care. And basically what this is a system that provides a little bit more infrastructure for those young people and their families who might be experiencing some barriers to completing their diversion program. So what the Systems of Care system, or what the Systems of Care program does is it helps provide additional services as well as navigation for these young people and their families in order to help facilitate successful completion of their diversion program. Next slide, please. So lastly, we're going to take a look at probation. Probation is also referred to as community supervision, and it has and remains the most common disposition for a young person who is adjudicated delinquent. Now, in some instances, probation or community service or community supervision, rather, it depends kind of where you are and what nomenclature is being used, can be used as a tool for informal adjustments. So diversion, basically something that's not going to be a traditional legal sanction. And we'll look at a state example where formal and informal supervision is clearly delineated. And again, much like other policy areas we've touched on today, there is a growing interest in aligning community supervision with the latest evidence-based practice. Next slide, please. So here I just have an excerpt. This is from a 2022 report issued by the National Center for Juvenile Justice. And essentially what this provides is the best practices for juvenile probation and reentry. And you'll see here that some of those things include an individualized program for the young person as well as their families. The program is to contain achievable goals, connection to pro-social community activities, as well as other adults that might be able to provide mentorship. And lastly, referrals to more intensive treatment should really only be used as needed. Next slide. So I mentioned that we'll look at a state that really has a clear delineation between informal and formal supervision. This is going to be Indiana. Last year, they enacted a juvenile justice reform bill that was House Bill 1359. And within this legislation, there were provisions related to probation. And what the legislation required was that the Judicial Conference of Indiana, they were mandated to develop standards for juvenile probation that reflected research-based evidence practice. And these standards had to be approved by July 1st of this year, so 2023. Next slide, please. So here's a snapshot of what those standards are. Now, this isn't comprehensive. That would be a lot of information, but these are kind of some of the highlights, if you will. So first, we'll look at informal supervision. And here we see some of those recommendations that we saw earlier on that first slide regarding best practices. We look at formal supervision and we see some similarities there. So in comparing these two types of supervision, it's worth noting that both are centered around using developmentally appropriate approaches. And they both avoid using kind of that one-size-fits-all approach to community supervision. So both, whether it's informal or formal, these programs these programs identify goals and needs that are specific to that young person. Additionally, you'll notice that both programs also seek to limit the duration of supervision to the least amount of time that is deemed to be necessary for that young person to complete the goals of their supervision program. In the Youth Justice Oversight Committee's 2023 report, it was noted, and this is a quote, that conditions of informal adjustment should differ from formal probation conditions. A program of informal adjustment is not the same as formal probation and should be treated as a brief strategic intervention. Now that stands in contrast to a formal probation program where, quote, where a formal probation program is intended to, quote, promote positive long-term behavior change. Next slide, please. So here we're going to get to the municipal examples. We've talked a lot about states, but there has been a lot of movement at the county and municipal level with regard to probation and community supervision. Now, one of those counties is Pierce County, Washington. In 2015, Pierce County received a probation transformation grant from the Annie E. Casey Foundation. And what they did was really take kind of a two-pronged approach to probation. The first prong being that they wanted to expand diversion. And in doing so, they would be able to focus their probation resources on those individuals who were deemed to be moderate or high risk. Now, in 2016, the state law actually did change, and this gave courts more discretion to use probation instead of out-of-home placement for youth with more serious offenses. So an example that was given in one of the reports I read was robbery. Now you'll see at the bottom of the slide some data that with regard to the more serious cases, probation increased from a disposition of 40% in 2016 to 77% in 2021. Now, I did try to find a statistic related to the successful completion or recidivism rates for the more serious cases that were referred to probation, and unfortunately, I could not find that information. However, there is data that shows that as of December 2020, more than 80% of the youth who were diverted had no new arrest 2 years after their diversion, and 93% had no felony arrests. Next slide. So here's a snapshot from Pierce County's Community Supervision website. And what I wanted to bring attention to is that Pierce County used an opportunity-based versus surveillance-oriented model. And there's a growing body of evidence that suggests successful completion of a community supervision program not only hinges on probation length, but probation structure. According to the director of Juvenile Justice Research and the Juvenile Justice Research and Reform Lab, Naomi Goldstein, incentives help young people learn to implement new desired behaviors, whereas applying punishment often only inhibits undesired behaviors, but does not replace them. Next slide, please. The final example related to probation I would like to share is a specific community-based supervision program out of Denver, Colorado. And this is designed for youth who are arrested for first-time nonviolent firearm offenses. So the Denver Handgun Intervention Program, it is administered by the Denver Juvenile Probation Department. It is a collaboration between prosecutors, public defenders, probation officers, and the juvenile court, as well as community members who work with young people in the program and act as mentors. The program was started in 2021, and young people who are under 18, again, who are arrested for that first time nonviolent firearm offense, are eligible for the program. When they're in the program, they are required to complete community service. They must participate in restorative justice, and the young person's parent or legal guardian must also participate in certain program requirements. Next slide, please. Now, this program, like many firearm-specific interventions, is relatively nascent, so there's not a tremendous amount of data out there yet. But I did find that in 2021, so the first year of the program's inception, 11 young people were referred to the program, and all 11 completed the program. Again, in the blocked out highlighting, that was a blurb saying that as of the start of the program, 36 young people have been involved in the program, but honestly, it was not clear to me from this whether that included, that meant there were 36 young people who successfully completed the program. But if a young person does successfully complete the handgun intervention program, which includes a 6-week education requirement, as well as 6 months on probation, then that young person will have their conviction expunged. Next slide, please. And with that, I would like to conclude today's discussion. I understand it was a lot of information, so I've provided some additional resources here. And I would also just like to say that the examples of states and jurisdictions and what they are doing with regard to policy reforms or other programs to address justice-involved youth are really merely a sampling of policy approaches. There continues to be a lot of dialogue and a legislative interest into whether or not more reforms are needed, or if, in fact, these reforms are effective. So with that, I would like to thank everyone for their time today, and I'm happy to take any questions that the committee might have.
Members of the committee, if you have questions, you should indicate using your microphone, starting with Delegate Kaufman.
Hi, yes, thank you. That was very informative. I really appreciate that, and thank you, Mr. Chair, and an early Merry Christmas to you and your family. I have 2 questions, if that's okay, Mr. Chair, as long as they're brief. What year was the Kentucky legislation passed? Do you know?
Yes, Chairman Clippinger, if I may answer.
Yes. You go right ahead.
Yes, that was in 2014.
So presumably that was done on a bipartisan basis, because I believe at the time the governor was a Democrat and the Republican was, the legislature was Republican. So that's just something interesting. And as I explore this issue further, people who feel like that the juvenile justice laws are too lenient, and the people that feel that they're adequate seem to be living in different worlds. So what I wanted to know is there a particular law that you could point out to us, ma'am, where there was a kumbaya moment in that the public defenders, advocates for children, and law enforcement and state district or state's attorneys were all in favor of reform, because they just seem so, their viewpoints seem so disparate?
That is an excellent question, and I would honestly have to do a little bit more research to find a law, to your point, where you really had a broad swath of consensus among not only different, party perspectives, but also among different stakeholders in the juvenile justice system. But I'm happy to look into that and see what I can find for you.
All right, thank you so much, ma'am.
You're welcome.
Delegate Grammer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks for being here, Kate. I have two questions for you today. So I'm reluctant to kind of compare our state to others. We operate differently. Our statutes quite a bit different. We have unique challenges. For example, in many cases, our Department of Juvenile Services, they've proven to be a little bit dysfunctional. But I think there might be a couple questions you can help out with. So the opaque nature of the juvenile system creates two problems that we might be able to look at as a matter of policy. The first is transparency. We're talking a lot about diversion today. And a lot of people, report the success of these programs, but you talk to other people and they say who are involved in either law enforcement or the juvenile process, and they'll say, yeah, that's kind of what they report, but my perspective is significantly different. For a lawmaker, it presents a challenge, like how am I supposed to measure with something like a program, like any kind of diversion program, the success? So my first question for you is transparency. And I'm talking about in the juvenile system, in a diversion program, in a home placement, like we literally have almost zero transparency in measuring success rates here. My second question for you is the other side of this coin, where we have this juvenile system to kind of remediate youth.
Let's do this, actually. Let's let her respond to the first question, then we'll go
Sure.
to the second question. But just so that I make sure I understand the first question. First question having to do with how you keep track and how you gather the data from diversion programs.
Diversion or the juvenile system in general.
And whether in her research of different states, whether
Correct.
that she was able to find that, because that was something that was mentioned a couple different times, including in the Kentucky example where they spent more time doing data. So with that, then we'll go back to Delegate Grammer after an answer to this question.
Sure. Thank you, Chairman Clippinger, because I was going to go back and to your point, Delegate, it is hard to compare states, and no two states are alike, and that's why we see so much statutory variation between states as they grapple with how best to deal with juveniles who become involved in the system. Now, hearkening back to those two states, I did bring those into the presentation today because they do have pretty robust data collection and oversight provisions in their bills. And that does help to a certain degree, I think, in getting to the crux of your question about the transparency issue. Now, the extent to which over time that data is going to be helpful and how that data is collected, that's certainly a question that I personally can't answer. But those just off the top of my head are some examples of what I've seen at the state level and certainly within statute in terms of efforts to break down that transparency and really get that data out there. But I'm happy to look into this question for you further.
My question is generally a little more broad. I think it even pertains to the juvenile system itself, but maybe I could follow up with you on that question in a matter of time. My second question is this. There is a particular youth in my district who is known to commit car thefts, and when he deals with the police, he says, "I'll see you tomorrow."
Mm-hmm.
And it's a matter of creating, okay, we've got this system, it's giving these youth an opportunity, but there should also be boundaries. And there are many cases in all of our districts where we see that the system is kind of just floundering, and we have these youths committing these significant crimes where there does not seem to be any boundary. And to me, that's like a matter of failure. At that point, if you have a youth that's just churning the system, we failed there. Can you speak to something we could look at, whether it's a state or specific policy, where we could say, okay, we see these cases of chronic crimes by the same youth. Here's how other states deal with that.
Sure. Broadly speaking, I would kind of go back to the Delaware example, although that is related to firearms versus carjackings. You know, some states have included those additional kind of carve outs or exceptions to when a young person, even though they might not meet that statutory age requirement, would come under the scope of the juvenile court. Now, that's not to say that's going to be the right fit for, you know, your state. That is one thing that we have seen within legislation. Now, as to your second question, part of the question, do you mind repeating that for me?
It's more of a broad thing, and
Oh, sure.
I hate to even talk about one crime. The crime du jour is car theft, and we all know about the issues of why that's happening. But the problems in my district go back 9 years at this point, and it's frankly it's less of about one youth committing one crime, and more about one youth going into the system and being out the same day. In some cases, 3 or 4 times the same day. We legitimately have community leaders. They know where these youths live. They know their name. They know their parents. They're in the system. They're back out the same day. The parents are asking for detention, but the system is it's tractionless. So it's more of forming a boundary within the juvenile system itself. There has to be a state out there who's really looked at this issue and come up with a solution, because from my perspective, this is nothing new. And it's not about a specific crime.
Delegate, to your point, you know, I'm kind of hard pressed to think of a state that's really kind of solved that tough question, because this is, you know, a question that a lot of states and jurisdictions, even ones that have passed these reform bills, continue to grapple with. I mean, I really do feel like that is one of the $1 million questions. And believe me, I wish I had a concrete answer for you with respect to that. Now, what I can say, and this might be somewhat adjacent to your question, but to your point about this being a broader kind of topic, those who support maybe some of these less traditional legal sanctions are coming at this from the perspective that youth are going to be better served in the community through maybe some intensive community-based treatment programs than sending them into the system and having them in detention, looking at kind of the long-term consequences that might result from that. So again, I understand that's probably adjacent to your question, but I do kind of want to bring a little bit of some of the other perspective from the stakeholders that have been in support of these types of legislative reforms.
Thank you. And I'll just close saying this. Frequently, we take these kind of initiatives, these kind of reform measures, and it's kind of like a cookie cutter stamp. It's more of a premise. Herein lies the problem. Right outside of my district, over the last 2 weeks, there was a carjacking. It was on the street that my wife grew up on. It was an elderly lady. She took her husband inside. He was on a wheelchair. She came back out. Someone pistol whipped her, concussion. That youth is getting waived to the adult court. So I'm hesitant to agree to a premise, because what we need is a solution here. And if the premise is to create this alternate path, this diversionary path where we're not putting youth on the adult system, for that kid, his life is over. So, but I don't want to put that weight on you. I appreciate your time, and we'll look into
Isn't that so?
Isn't that so, Mr. Chair?
Okay. With love in my heart, Delegate Conaway.
Thank you for the love in your heart, Mr. Chairman. And thank you for coming in with your presentation. First of all, I'd like to say that I don't know about the implied reason for carjackings, but I can say that several years ago, I put in a bill called 1515 to make it mandatory that if you carjack somebody that was 15 years older than yourself, you would come up with a sentence of 15 years. I still am in agreement with that to protect the senior citizens that are out here, not to say that I'm one, but anyway. In reference to academic failure, was there any mental aptitude testing to the physical age of juvenile versus the mental age? Did you have any data on that you recorded?
Delia, that is a question that I would have to find some resources and research for you, because I definitely think that kind of falls outside of my policy purview. But there is a tremendous body of research about youth, where they are at developmentally, and there could very well be some information out there regarding specifically your questions about aptitude and.
I mean, some of these things, as I see it, a person might think that they're playing a actual virtual video game. So
Okay.
it's hard to tell virtual from reality. We just watch YouTube, and I'm getting ready to put out something that's called "Is That Real?" Because you don't know if you're looking at something that's real or it's not real. I mean, is NASA sending up the space shuttles and UFOs coming down, or what's the story? So we need to know what these people perceive as being the reality of the world that we live in and how they're being taught. So I thank you with that very much.
Okay. Any other questions? All right. We want to thank NCSL for their presentation today. Thank you very much to Kate Bryan, who's been with us. Really appreciate the information. If people have further questions and would like more information about what the states have done that she mentioned today, whether it was Kentucky or South Dakota or Delaware or others, feel free to email her directly, and we've got a copy of the slides and we can provide that information to you. All right.
All right. Thank you so much, Chairman Clippinger and the committee. I really appreciate the invitation to speak today and your time.
Thank you. We're going to go now to Judge Stam, who is with us virtually. All right, Judge Stam is going to speak to us with a briefing from the Maryland Judiciary on juvenile justice matters, and then we're going to start talking to the programs who are here and not here in the room with us today. So Judge Stam, are you there?
I am here. Been in the waiting room for a little while.
All right, there you go. Judge Stam was supposed to be with us in the very, very first briefing, but Judge Stam was ill. So we're very grateful that he's here with us at the third briefing. Judge Stam, go right ahead.
Yeah, it was terrible. I come back from vacation, ended up with COVID. At any rate, well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm Judge Stam. I'm from the Circuit Court for St. Mary's County and the current chair of the Juvenile Law Committee. And after the presentations by DJS, law enforcement, public defender, the state's attorneys, and many others, there really is not a whole lot more that I can add to this presentation or add to their information. However, I would like to remind everyone that the judiciary does not make policy and they're bound by the laws passed by this legislature. Now, the mandate under juvenile law is for rehabilitation and community safety. Frankly, it's a balancing act. With this new law, there are a number of concerns and observations that I and other juvenile judges and magistrates throughout the state have experienced. And first, and this is the one I think is probably the most important, there's a lack or a limited number of services and programs available for children who are given probation. Now, not every jurisdiction in Maryland has the same number and level of services available for these children. And because of this lack or limited availability of services and programs, and the time requirements for the length of probation under the Juvenile Justice Reform Act, it's almost impossible to get these services into place and working within the time frames that the deadlines now require. For example, misdemeanors now have a 6-month length and felonies have a 1-year length of how long probation is supposed to take place before it's terminated. Now, it is possible to add extensions every 3 months, but only after a hearing, and for a maximum length for misdemeanors of 1 year, and for felonies, possibly 3 years. Now, these extensions require a finding of good cause and to ensure that the child completes treatment, a rehabilitation program, or whatever service has been ordered. There's also a limitation on the court as the use of detention. For the most part, juveniles charged with misdemeanors cannot be detained unless the alleged act involves a handgun or the child's been adjudicated delinquent at least twice in the preceding 12 months. Now, the court truly has no discretion, even if the court is of the opinion after listening to the facts that it's in the best interest of the child and the community, our safety, to order detention. And lastly, children under 13 cannot be charged with a crime. If involved in an alleged crime while under 13, they receive services through a process called SINS, or Child in Need of Supervision. I'm not aware of very many SINS petitions actually being formally filed in the circuit courts, in the juvenile courts. In fact, I've been a judge for almost 18 years and have never had a SINS case appear in front of me. Now, this briefing is very brief, to be a matter of fact. But it's the reason why it's so brief is we follow the law. We don't make policy. What we can do is make observations on things that we think are keeping us from the mandate of rehabilitation and community safety. So with that very brief briefing, if you have any questions, I certainly would like to be able to answer them if I'm able to.
Delegate Kaufman.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor, and I'm glad you're feeling better. From people that who think our juvenile laws are too lenient, Your Honor, I constantly hear that, well, kids aren't afraid of the consequences, it's not a deterrent, and that's a problem. When you are talking to a youth, do you think that they are not intimidated by the consequences, or do you think that and enough children or teens are shaken that you don't see them again in your courtroom? Like, are the consequences adequate in your view?
Well, let me preface that by saying that I'm in a unique situation in that was a school teacher for 12 years in the public school system. I actually have a master's in education and human development besides my Juris Doctorate. And when I actually took the bench, my county had decided, the administrative judge, that I would be doing juvenile cases and I had done juvenile cases from day one back in 2006. Now, I will say that I think prior to the deadlines on probation, that children were more afraid of being on probation because it was for a longer period of time. The fact now, though, is that I think that shortness of getting these programs started, getting them into the program, and they know that here's a date that is deadline, either going to be successful or unsuccessful, that takes away from the consequences of them realizing that they're not going to be done with us until they either age out or until they successfully complete the programs. Now, that's my opinion. I'm not speaking for the whole judiciary, but that's what I believe.
Thank you. Very helpful, Your Honor. Happy holidays.
Well, you too.
Good afternoon, Your Honor, and thank you for joining us today. You touched on an issue which I've been trying to understand, and that is referrals for children in need of supervision. I received a report, and it showed a real variation between jurisdictions of individuals that have been referred to SINS. I think in Charles County in the last fiscal year, there were 127. And in my county, in Baltimore County, there were only 3, which is twice the size of Charles County. So I'm just trying to, can you share with us, in your opinion, why we're not using the SINS process?
Well, that's actually a very difficult question, because the way the SINS process is, it's just like juvenile petitions when they're filed. It starts off where the police are involved, then it moves to juvenile services. Then at that point, it could even become a petition if a child was charged with a crime, and if it's going to be a SINS child, that petition would be filed. And then what ends up happening after that is then finally can be a petition filed with the courts. Now, I've done thousands of juvenile cases, and I have never had a SINS appear in front of me formally in St. Mary's County. And if my understanding of the Charles County, I've spoken to their administrative judge about SINS, because I'm also concerned all these high numbers and they're not making it to the court system, is how many are making it to the court system there. And if you're looking at those numbers, it's my understanding that there's not a whole lot of petitions have actually been filed in the circuit courts themselves. So I can't answer why they're not making it to the circuit court, but I can tell you that if they do make it to the circuit court, then we will take care of whatever we need to take care of.
Thank you.
Yeah. And I have the same concerns you do, sir.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you for being here, Judge Stamm. I have a formative question, and I think you're touching on the balancing act between rehabilitation and public safety. This is probably more important than any policy in regard to the juvenile crime issue. Is figuring out, do you detain? Do you provide a service? Do you make a mandate? Herein lies the problem, though. I think there are probably some jurisdictions that are detaining too much. I think there are probably some jurisdictions that are not detaining at all. I think there are probably a lot of jurisdictions that they don't have any sins petitions. But
well, you don't, let me interrupt. You don't detain in a sins.
I get that. But
Okay.
here's my bigger question. As a policymaker, as a person sitting in this room, we frequently can't make any decision about any of that. We can't even question or begin to analyze how Department of Juvenile Services detains, or how jurisdiction detains, or how many sins petitions are filed in each county. So my question is this: where is the value for us in finding transparency in either the courts or the juvenile system itself, so that we can be more informed about how the juvenile system is operating, how they're making decisions, or how the courts are making decisions, or how law enforcement is making decisions? What should we put in the law so we can be more informed?
So right now, the way the law is written is that there obviously, and you're touching on it very strongly, is the use of detention is very limited. What I did is I pulled out some notes I have here for myself. It starts off with an intake officer considering the results of a risk scoring instrument being placed before placing a child in detention. Now, when that risk assessment's done, and from a standpoint of a circuit court judge, if there's going to be detention, we use that assessment, but we also have all parties at the table. And what I mean by that is you have your state's attorney making a recommendation after reviewing the same instrument. You have usually it's a public defender, but it can be private counsel. And the department, of course, is in there making their recommendations. Now, the balancing act between safety and rehabilitation, I believe, quite frankly, if you rehabilitate the child, then the safety of the community is going to be assured. However, there are young people who, frankly, using a Southern Maryland expression, they're hard crabs. And so they're not going to be really listening to anything other than that hammer of detention. Now, individual judges, individual state's attorneys, public defenders all have their own philosophies as to how or why a child should be detained. But I know from my standpoint, if the child's in danger to themselves or to the community, I find the law now where it's almost impossible for me to detain a misdemeanor to be a hardship in trying to do that balancing act. So, for example, just throw this out at you. An unauthorized use of a vehicle is a misdemeanor, but it's not a carjacking. Usually it can be a kid who's taken someone's car, their parents often, and they take off. Well, when they're brought back, they're putting them back in the same environment that they were in when they did this alleged crime. And if they are adjudicated to have done it, they maybe someone should be detained in order to go to some residential program to help change their behavior. Hopefully that answers your question.
It's a great answer, and I'm glad you brought up the risk assessment tool, because that is a tool that many people I've spoken with questioned. And it's a good way to kind of think about this. You have a system you use to measure risk. You talk through it. You talk about it. But there are people in the juvenile system and law enforcement that I've talked to that have said, I've had juveniles cases where the risk assessment has been through the roof and the parent is begging for detention, and we let that youth back. We did not detain, and then they committed a violent crime. And I think your perspective is spot on, that you're doing what you think is prudent in that case, but I'm blind. And that's my point. And the risk assessment tool is something that's used in the juvenile system, in the courts, but how are we even supposed to think about it?
What do you mean, how do you should think about it? Talking about a
if-
formula or?
For example, you mentioned the crabbiness of some jurisdictions in Southern Maryland. If they are taking the same cases with the same risk assessments and they're detaining constantly, and certain non-crabby jurisdictions are not detaining at all, there's a bit of a divergence there that frankly, I think I should be able to look at. And I think that's when we're talking about this balancing of rehabilitation and public safety, I think that's where the magic is. But I can't even begin to analyze how these jurisdictions are using things such as risk assessment tools.
But the issue, I think, and Judge can speak for himself, but the risk assessment tool is being used by the Department of Juvenile Services. It's not being used by the court. So I'm going to ask if you want to redirect a little bit towards the court's involvement with that. That's fine. And I see your larger point about some counties doing one thing and some counties doing another, but I don't know that, and again, the judge can speak for himself, and if I'm wrong, it won't be the first or last time I'm wrong in front of a judge. But I'll just say I'm not sure that that's on point for Judge Stamm.
But they do go to the court. Those
Department of Juvenile Services makes a decision before it even gets to a magistrate as to whether or not the person should be detained at the front end. And I'm sorry, if Judge Stamm, if you want to respond to my.
I think you're right. You're both on point. I think what it is that assessment is used by juvenile services, but when it comes into the courtroom, a judge can look at it, a defense can look at it. More importantly, I think from the standpoint of law enforcement, a state's attorney can look at it. Unfortunately, I don't know how to answer your question as to the different ways that judges and magistrates, even police officers, do their job. Some officers, of course, will give more warnings than others. And it's same in the court system is we're going to have judges that are going to be more likely to detain versus others who don't. But using a best standard, I would say that risk assessment, whether you agree with it or not, is a starting point. But people also have in that hearing the ability to bring up other information, outside information, for the judge to make an independent discretionary decision.
I appreciate your answers.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for coming in to testify and give us this information. My question was, if your juvenile child takes your vehicle and uses it unlawfully, does that necessarily mean that they need to have the contact with the system where they need outside counseling? Was that a fair question?
I'm not sure I can answer it. I think it's a good question, but remember, Anna, the way the juvenile process, and maybe if Chairman will give me some leeway, I'll go and show you the process. Chairman, is that okay?
That's fine.
All right. So when a child is alleged to have committed a criminal act, which as an adult would be incarcerable, they can qualify for juvenile court except for those cases that have been specifically by the legislature said they are direct filings, or there are filings that require them to go directly to an adult court. Now, if they don't fall in that category and they are something that's in the jurisdiction of the juvenile court, then the Department of Juvenile Services will do an intake. And at that intake, they examine everything that is involved in the crime or alleged crime at this point. They talk with the parents. They often and should talk to the victims, and then they can make a decision. So if they felt that an unauthorized use of a vehicle was something that they could do through rehabilitative services through the department without sending it to the court for a formal filing of a criminal or juvenile petition, that's what would happen. The victims often are involved, and if they're not, they are given an idea of what took place, and they can go ahead and they can appeal it, and the state's attorney would be the arbitrator there. Once the case, though, goes to the state's attorney's office, they again also have the right to decide whether or not to file a petition, because the actual petition that's filed in the juvenile system is not from juvenile services, but it's from the state's attorneys. Then at that point, they can come to court and it goes through the court process, which is just like an adult process from the standpoint of everything but a jury. Child has the same beyond reasonable doubt rights, confrontation, just like they do in the adult system. They don't have a right to a jury because you're not being found guilty or not guilty, you're being found involved or not involved. And then you go, if the child is adjudicated to be involved in this crime, then you go to disposition. So, Delegate, does that answer your question?
Somewhat. So if the juvenile is waived up to adult court, but they made some statements while they were a juvenile underage, can those statements still be used against them? And what do you think that's appropriate or not appropriate?
Well, you actually, there are three ways of looking at that. One is if they made those statements during intake, that is confidential and that cannot be brought into the case itself. If it's a statement that was done through, let's say, an interrogation, you do have the new rules, which came into effect last year, which is the Child Interrogation Protection Act, and that takes into consideration everything being said. And the presumption is, if notices aren't done, if the attorney's not done, that should be suppressed. And of course, whether or not the kid is waived up to adult court or is waived down from adult court, they still have the right to a motions hearing, which is to suppress any evidence that was inappropriately taken.
Thank you very much.
Right. I hope that answered your question.
Your Honor, I don't see any further questions here. We thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today.
It was a pleasure. Good seeing you again.
Thank you. All right, now we're going to hear from 6 different programs from across the state. Each who approach it maybe a little bit differently. And so we're going to hear about the differences, starting with youth advocate programs. We're going to hear from Craig Jernigan and Fred Fogg. Are they virtual or are they here? No, they're right there. Sorry. Come on up. Come up to the table. Said we were going to give everybody about 10 minutes to talk and then questions to follow. Again, as members of the committee consider questions, we're looking to look perhaps more deeply into the programs that they're running and questions about the programs that they're running as opposed to larger policy issues. But, do the best you can. So whoever would like to begin, and that would be fine.
Thank you, Chairman Clippinger and committee for inviting YAP to testify today before you. We really appreciate it. My name is Craig Jernigan, Regional Director for the Youth Advocate Programs. I cover Maryland and DC programs for YAP. Been with the organization now for 19 years.
And good afternoon. Thank you for inviting us to speak with you. I'm Fred Fogg. I'm the National Director of Community-Based Safety Initiatives for the Youth Advocate Programs. And we're going to give a high-level, overview of youth advocate programs and I'll start in the work of what we're currently doing and go a little deeper into our juvenile justice work. And Craig will speak more about our direct work here in the state of Maryland. Youth Advocate Programs is a nonprofit organization that's been doing community-based work for over 50 years. Our foundation is in juvenile justice. We started with an effort to remove young people who are housed in a Camp Hill prison with adults to develop strategies to return them safely to their communities with the appropriate wraparound supports and resources to keep them, moving in a productive manner, becoming positive citizens of the community and keeping the community safe. With the success of that program in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, we were able to grow other programs in Philadelphia and then in New Jersey. And now we're currently operating in 35 states and over 100 communities. In that we provide the core of our work is, working with individuals and their family members to provide a strength-based wraparound approach, connecting them with an advocate who served as a specialized mentor who's specially trained to not only, serve as an advocate for that young person, the mentor for the young person, but for the entire family. So we conduct a strength-based needs assessment to identify what the needs and the interests are of those, the family members and the young person, and help them develop a plan that they have buy-in to. They lead that strategy that's going to help make them successful and keep the young one or the participant safe in the community. And as we develop that plan with them at the lead at the table, we ask 4 basic questions. You know, what do you need? How can we help? How do we work together as equal partners to meet your goals? And how can you give back to the community? We also, you know, foster civic responsibility. You know, what can your give back be once you receive the support you need for your challenges? And in that plan, the advocate walks that family through that process. So whatever the needs are, we develop a strategy to help them meet those goals. We don't just connect them with resources, we walk them through that process. We connect them with a person, with a resource, excuse me, so they can move toward, you know, dependence to interdependence. They understand what the systems are and the resources are, they can navigate them themselves. So whatever that need might be, whether it be legal, vocational, educational, mental health supports, we make those connections for them. In addition, we also identify, you know, the needs of, again, the parents and the family members. If we have a parent that may have an issue with employment or daycare, we link them with those opportunities. We have another workforce development component called YAP Works and Supported Work. Supported Work is a program we have developed where we identify local community businesses and we connect young people to those opportunities so they learn about the work environment. We can give them a stipend while they're working. So it's subsidized employment. And while they're actively working in that subsidized employment capacity, we also help shop them around to other businesses to find more permanent employment. So that's to get young people and adults and their parents. Their parents are also eligible for that service as well. Those that might have challenges in traditional employment by trying to obtain, you know, employment through traditional means, we connect them to the site, provide an advocate that's going to support them for that process, meet basic needs, make sure they have alarm clocks, appropriate attire, you know, and mentor them through that process. Ultimately shopping them, you know, to other long-term employment. And the other component we have for our workforce development piece is YAP Works, where we take the young people and the participants and connect them to opportunity advisors in the community. So if there's a business or a profession that they're interested in, we'll connect them with someone in that community who is in that field that will serve as a mentor for them and guide them through the process. And we also teach them about what the labor market in their local environment. What are the job opportunities? What are the interests? Like what can you participate in? What are the requirements for participating in those jobs? And we make sure that they have that information and they're connected with someone that can guide them after their involvement in the program. And again, our work is, you know, again, strength-based wraparound. We have a framework for what we do, but it's unique to every community and every family member, every young person that we work with. We're flexible enough to create an opportunity or create a strategy that is directly related to the needs of the individual young person and their family, and the broader community. And they have you know, input into that process. They let us know what their needs are, what their goals are. We help them meet those goals. And we worked with, you know, as it relates to juvenile justice, Craig will get more specific into what we're doing in Maryland. But we've been engaged in juvenile justice reform since our inception. My work is specifically around juvenile justice reform is in New Jersey with the implementation of the JDAI initiative, and, you know, building out community alternatives to incarceration. And that effort has proven successful, where we're in lieu of sending young people and wasting dollars on prisons that were not effectively supporting our young people, we found out ways to create comprehensive plans, connecting to the resources in their community to keep communities safe and to prevent recidivism. In that effort, you know, we've been able to reduce confinement of young people by over 60% in the facilities while maintaining safety in the communities, utilizing that wraparound approach, understanding that the young person, you know, is the identified participant, but we have to work with that young person in his home environment and the community he's working in, because that's not going to change immediately. Like the young person may benefit from supports and resources, but they're returning to the same environment in a lot of cases that haven't changed. So we support him in that environment and the family members as well. So Craig, if you want to talk a little bit more about what we're doing here in Maryland, and I can talk more about maybe some of our other reform efforts.
Yeah, very briefly, as I began earlier when I said I was with YAP for 19 years, YAP got started in Maryland 20 years ago, providing juvenile justice services in the city of Baltimore. And over the years, we've expanded those services, providing safe, cost-effective programming for intensive case management services for the juveniles in the city of Baltimore and several counties now. Actually, we're in Prince George's County, Montgomery County, Harford County, Baltimore County, Anne Arundel County, providing these particular services where we've expanded over the years. I would just like to mention that a John Jay College of Criminal Justice study found that 87% of our program participants did not offend, and that 6 to 12 months after completing our program, 90% of those youth were still living in the communities successfully. Also, I just want to mention in the city of Baltimore, we've recently been noticed by the city to provide some intensive services under what is called GVRS. Many of you may be familiar with it, which is the Group Violence Reduction Strategy, where we've been working with juveniles from the ages of 13 to 16 years old who have been identified as individuals who more likely will be involved in gun violence. And we've been providing those intensive wraparound services to those particular youth over the past 3 years. It's initially started off as focusing on adults, but because of the work that we've done over the years, we've been identified as a strong partner to work with those juveniles that are potentially involved in gun violence in this city and outside of the city of Baltimore as well.
And we've been, able to implement strategies across every contact point in the justice system, from, street level station house adjustments on through the system to reentry services to support young people returning back to the community. And one of the things we focus on is, the delinquency issue is the behavior, but we really look at what the root causes are. So that takes, getting to know the young person, the community, their environment, the family situation they're in, to provide them the appropriate resources to move them further away from the delinquency. And I know there's definitely a push to move away from more restrictive and long-term, probation and supervision. But I think that also there may be a challenge in that traditionally that's how young people in the community get services. That's how they get on the radar for support. Oftentimes young people who are low, not on the radar for law enforcement or, for delinquency issues, they have the same risk factors. And they might use a low-level, adjustment. They may need the same level of support that someone who's further along the system needs to prevent them from entering the system in the first place. So on the front end, we've worked on strategies. Some of our work in New Jersey, we, supported legislation for the Transformative Justice Hub, which allowed us to touch young people in the community at any point in the contact system, whether they hadn't gotten involved yet and, the family member came and asked for some support and services, or whether they want a reentry in and they may have maxed out and not have any parole supervision or probation supervision, they could still come back for resources. So being able to create this environment that was restorative, healing centered, strength-based, and providing wraparound resources for someone to just come in and be able to walk and receive those resources is making a huge impact on how we eliminate young people from coming into the system in the first place. So on the very front end, we're working to divert young people from involvement in the justice system. And on the back end, we're preventing the recidivism by connecting those individuals, those young people, to the resources and supports they need and their family environments need.
Okay, we'll take questions for this first panel. We'll start with Delegate Williams.
Thank you so much for being here this afternoon. The juveniles, how are the juveniles that you guys work with referred to your program?
May I answer, Jim? Yes. So as the judge mentioned earlier on the call, it starts with the intake process of the Department of Juvenile Justice, where they do a risk assessment, and then they identify whether or not a youth will be appropriate for our particular programming that we offer to prevent the youth from being detained or being sent out of state. Because initially, when we first got started, the state of Maryland was sending a lot of juveniles out of the state of Maryland, and they decided it was more cost effective to provide service in the community. So it starts at the intake process, and a referral is sent by a case manager to our services.
Okay. And then also too, with the cases that you guys handle, what type of data points do you keep track of as it relates to the juveniles that you're working with?
So you do this traditional intake, right? So we have an in addition to the expected outcomes we're required to achieve by way of contract, we have another set of outcomes that we track as it relates to each individual young person we're working with or participant. So education information, how they're performing in school, delinquency issues, basic demographic information, employment data, whether or not, where they are in terms of whether they're looking for employment, they're currently employed, whatever's have been taken while they've been involved to become employed. We look at some of the some of the other risk factors that are involved in the young person's referral to us that might be more specific to a specific contract. But generally, we look at their legal status, their housing status, educational and vocational status, and whether or not they abided by the goals of the initial contract.
Just have two more questions. That's okay. And then my next question is with regard to the children or the individuals in your system, like roughly what's the duration or average duration that the juveniles are within your program?
Yes, so our services are generally 6 months to a year, but on average it's 6 to 8 months stay with us with intensive services provided during that time.
Okay. And then, and you mentioned contracts, so you're contracted through DJS, or how does that operate?
Yes, we're currently contracted through the Department of Juvenile Justice to provide services for that population. And we also in several different counties provide services to crossover youth within the child welfare system as well.
Okay. All right. Those are all the questions I have.
Thank you. Do you have a limit as to for the age of the children that you provide services to? Is there a floor?
Well, we have them as young as 11, and of course up to age of 21 years old. But we actually provide services beyond that as well.
Okay. And do you only take intakes from the Department of Juvenile Services, or do you take intake from other sources as well? I think I saw in your materials that you also take it directly from police departments and other sources, or is it only from the Department of Juvenile Services?
Well, under our Department of Juvenile Services currently is directly through them, but under the GVRS initiative, we are actually taking referrals via police department, state and federal individuals, as well as street outreach contacts.
Can you give us a sense of what your capacity is? How many juveniles you can provide services to at any point in time?
Yes. So currently, right now, we're at a capacity of 105 juveniles that we're providing services for within any given 30 days, with the ability to actually increase those numbers to 155 right at the moment.
And I know that you're providing services across the country. What's your Maryland budget? Do you have a sense of?
Well, we are coming upon the end. We're only on the end of a 5-year budget. Actually ends in 2024, and hopefully we will be renewed for another 5 years. But that budget was over a 5-year period of 17 million.
17 million. Okay. Delegate Munoz, then I'll go down the line over here.
Thank you, gentlemen. You can tell we're all pretty excited. They asked like the majority of my questions, so I'll keep it brief. So just to clarify, so is your funding directly from the Department of Juvenile Services, and that's where you get your referrals from here in the state of Maryland?
Yes, as far as our alternative to incarceration services with juveniles is strictly right now from the Department of Juvenile Justice, except for our services that are currently being operated or paid for through Monzi in Baltimore City, where those youth who go through that particular program, that is funded through ARPA funding, where we provide services for them.
Okay, so right now you're doing about 105. Is that currently, or is that like this year?
Currently, currently that's where our number's at.
Okay. Okay. And you could go up to 155. So are you not getting referrals?
We are getting the referrals with the new expansion. We've, as I mentioned earlier, we have recently expanded it like into Harford County, Baltimore County, and Anne Arundel County. So we're getting the referrals as we speak. Like they're actually increasing within the last several months.
Okay, so you'll be taking on more youth into your program?
Yes.
And is there anything that we could do to help you to better serve more youth in the state of Maryland?
I would say just to continue to recognize that we want to make sure we provide intensive wraparound supportive services to those juveniles, but also to understand that resources and services around workforce development and mental health, which is so closely associated with a lot of trauma that we're seeing. And as we know, a lot of, whether it's vicarious trauma or direct trauma, our juveniles are really dealing with it, not just a one time, they're living it daily. So understanding that services around that portion of the work is very critical to be a part of what we do.
And just my last question, do you have an ability to keep the youth in your program or to make them participate? Do you have any sort of teeth when it comes to that aspect when you get a referral from DJS or the police or something like that? Or is it just completely optional?
Well, there's some teeth. Juveniles have been mandated to participate in the program by the courts, but a lot of times we find that mandate, or whether it's mandated or whether a juvenile is like family acts that they participate in the program, it's not difficult because a lot of our youth, when they come with us, we generally provide them, as Mr. Frog mentioned earlier, advocates who have we zip code higher. So, like for example, if we're in Harford County, we identify staff that live in Harford County to work with those youth in Harford County. So more than likely than not, a lot of the staff we work with, the youth connect with, can relate with, and our staff can like really reach out to them closely. So we don't have to bite too hard when it comes to our services.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair. I have two quick questions. First, I want to thank you all for the work you're doing and thank you for bringing up trauma. I constantly talk about our children come to school with trauma, and I think that it leads to some of the crime that we are seeing. So two quick questions. Do you see repeat offenders?
Over my 20 years, 19 years with youth advocate programs, yes, I have seen repeat offenders. But a lot of times those repeat offenders is when when I've seen when they have left the program. You notice that because of some of the services not there and the intensive service that we provide, some youth do repeat. However, in our case, as I mentioned earlier in the John Jay report, the study showed that 90% of the youth that we work with actually do not.
That's great. And then my next question and last question is, through the intake process and out of the youth that you serve and that you have seen, what are the top crimes that they are committing?
I would say the recent situation around and committee member who spoke on carjacking has definitely been one of the pieces that's there. But over the years, I've seen the top three would be possession of controlled dangerous substances and possession of some illegal weapon. And then we will go deal with like the carjacking or unauthorized use of vehicles, because many of the cases I wouldn't say have been a lot of carjacking. It's been juveniles who've been just involved in stolen vehicles itself.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So one of my questions would be, with the program that y'all have, is this a residential program? Is it just like they come and report then leave, in and out type of thing? What is the structure of the program?
Yeah, no, sir. So how it's basically set up, once we receive an intake, we begin the process where we go into the home, we do an intensive meeting with the family, and within the first 30 days, we develop an ISP, individualized service plan for that particular youth, and we identify certain goals, and we also identify the safety issues or concerns that the courts may present to us. So we develop a plan where an advocate work with them on an average of 22.5 hours per week with that particular youth, in addition to working with the youth, providing wraparound support to that family. And on average, there's 2 youth per advocate. So the work is done, whether it may be done in the home, in the school, and on the streets, basketball court, gyms, wherever we find our youth showing up, that's where our advocates really provide those services. So it could be anywhere. It could be a young person who's committed a crime in one county, but end up residing in another county for whatever reason. We follow that youth to that.
Sure, thank you. So it's not a residential?
No, sir.
Okay, appreciate it. You spoke a little bit about schools. So we often try to find ways being proactive and not reactive, right? I think we're talking a lot about reactive policy. So being proactive and kind of working with the schools and families as a part of the wraparound services, do you find that that is an area that maybe your organization is working in or can work more in with dealing with our schools in a pre-active role?
Well, I'm gonna let you answer a piece of that, but thank you, Committee Gary, for that, because that is one piece that I should have mentioned earlier to Chairman when you asked that question. We've actually shown up in many different schools recently that have been involved in some shootings. You've all heard of several shootings that have taken place in certain locations in the state of Maryland, in particular in Baltimore City, and we've suggested that we be a part of what Mr. Fred can speak about, bringing some of the services that we offer in other locations around the country as far as the school-based initiative, because yes, that is an area where we find that we can prevent and circumvent situations from actually spilling over into the community, and also addressing some issues before they can actually take place within the school. But you want to speak about that service?
Sure. One of our most successful school-based programs started in the schools was our Choose to Change program in Chicago. That program was designed with our YAP-RAP advocate model paired with trauma-informed CBT, cognitive behavioral therapy. In that program, we had the young people, and you know, in certain communities, mental health is a stigma. So we talked about coaching as opposed to therapy. So we worked with the schools and the systems to identify young people who are most at risk of being shooters or being shot in the city of Chicago. And we work with that high-risk population. And provided them our YAP wraparound approach, mentoring and support services, addition with Sparks, which is the CBT curriculum that helped the young people identify the trauma that they were experiencing in their community and mount appropriate trauma responses. Because we understand that in urban communities, our young people may be impacted by trauma at levels twice that of some Iraqi war veterans. We understand that in some communities, the trauma is now post is persistent. So this tool, this component teaches them how to deal with the stress and mount appropriate responses on an everyday basis. That program, again, worked with the highest risk young people who are most likely to be shot or be victims or be perpetrators of violence. And after that program was engaged in a randomized controlled study with the University of Chicago Crime Labs, who conducted a study and found that after 18 months, there was a 48% reduction in violent crime arrests for our population versus the control group. So that's a program that was extremely successful in this implementation that has been expanded throughout the public school system in Chicago. And we've replicated that model on the YAPS brand, Pursuing Excellence, which we're also starting and launching in other school systems across the country.
Are y'all utilizing that here in Maryland at this time?
At this time, we are not.
No, we're not, but we've made several attempts through to provide those services in the school system, but we have yet to be successful in making it come to fruition. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
One last question is, you said it was $17 million. Is that $17 million over 5 years or $17 million a year?
Correct, 17 within 5 years,
Well,
17
okay,
over
so
5
17
years,
over
yes,
5
yes.
years. All right. Thank you very, very much for being here today. I don't see any further questions for this panel, so we'll move on to the next panel. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for the opportunity.
Now, from a different direction, we'll hear from Fresh Start from Sergeant Stephanie Hinson, Captain Michael Ashburn, Acting Lieutenant Troy Cash, and William Lowry. And they may have a PowerPoint. Who'd like, oh, there we go. All right. Whoever'd like to begin, you go right ahead.
All right. Good afternoon, Chairman and committee members. Thank you for providing us time to speak about our program. Excuse me. I'm Acting Lieutenant Troy Cash, Executive Officer of the Community Relations Division. This is Sergeant Stephanie Hinson, Supervisor of our Youth Engagement Services, and our Program Manager, Carol Perico. Today, we're here to talk about our diversion program that our agency is running at this time that we've seen great success with. Not only is it a diversion program, but it's a program that searches for the root causes for delinquent acts in our youth to provide them necessary resources and also provide them coaching and mentorship.
Hello, thank you. Just a brief introduction myself. My name is Carol Perico. I'm the civilian part of our unit, and my background is in education and sociology. So the Youth and Victim Engagement Services Unit is responsible for diversion programs for the youth in our county. We look to hold our first and second time juvenile offenders accountable and prevent recidivism while providing them with a second chance. We are looking to redirect that adolescent behavior rather than looking to criminalize it. A successful completion of our program means that there is no referral to the Department of Juvenile Service, nor is the case forwarded to the state's attorney's office. We are committed to using the least coercive among reasonable alternatives consistent with preserving public safety, order, individual liberty. And our department has been utilizing universal screening for diversion since 2016. What that means for us is when a juvenile receives a citation in the county and is forwarded to our unit, we screen the case based on their background and the offense committed, and we are looking to divert as many youth as possible. We have 4 diversion programs. We have our teen court program, our juvenile offenders in need of supervision. We have a diverting at-risk teens, and we have Fresh Start. And what we will be focusing on today is Fresh Start, which is our safe, trauma-informed, accountable, restorative, and transparent. Those are all the what the program is founded on.
So Fresh Start is a pre-arrest diversion program. So what that means, we have eligible offenses and then offenses that are not eligible for the program. So for our eligible offenses, you're looking at second-degree assaults. I'll point out what our primary ones are. So second-degree assaults, weapons offense, that's not including firearms. So that would be if they brought a pocket knife to school. And then you may have some minor theft cases, but all of these are going to be your lower misdemeanor offenses that would be eligible for the program. We do not take felony cases. And then any of the ones on the right side of the screen, animal cruelty, arson, sex offenses, and any arrestable traffic violations, and also intimate partner violence. All of those would be ineligible for the diversion program of Fresh Start.
So our goals and our program goals and objectives, we're looking to reduce the number of youth who are charged with low-level offenses in both school and community settings. As Sergeant Hinson said, our Fresh Start program is through officer referral, so it can be from a call to service in the community or through a school-based offense. We are looking to reduce racial and ethnic disparities in the juvenile citation process. Again, we're able to do this because it's based on qualified offense and the youth's background. We're looking to reduce our rates of recidivism. We're attempting to do that through the programs and services we're offering. We're attempting to offer them meaningful diversion. So we're trying to correct the behavior and not overlook what has happened. And we are increasing early intervention efforts and linkages to services for the youth that we work with.
Again.
There we go.
So how this program works, basically, as Carol mentioned, this would be a officer referral to our program. So for the youth coming into this program, they cannot have more than 2 priors. So, and they cannot have been in the program prior. If there's a victim involved in this offense, the victim would have to agree for the youth to go into the program in lieu of charges. So with each case, we will, when that is referred to the unit, we will look at it and then we will be able to. we will look at that case and make sure that it is eligible for the program, meaning the youth does not have more than 2 priors. If there's a victim involved, the victim agrees to go into the program in lieu of charges, and there's not more than 2 priors. So when we say that, yes, this case is eligible for our program, it will be assigned to an officer. The officer will meet with the guardians of the juvenile and the youth. In that meeting, it usually takes about 45 minutes to 60 minutes. They will try to find out what's going on. What's the root cause of whatever the youth, why they are committing these crimes. From there, the officer will create a program specifically for that youth, and they have 90 days to complete the program. If they fail to meet those guidelines or meet the requirements within the program, they will be charged for whatever the offense was. If they reoffend while in the program, they will be charged with whatever the new offense was and then charged with whatever the original offense was. The goal here is we want to be able to provide the youth with resources, again, trying to figure out what the root cause was. For example, if it's a kid stealing, why are they stealing? Do they come from a single parent home where that single parent just lost their job? Maybe we can intervene at that point and give the guardian resources and the youth at the same time to hopefully eliminate any of those issues reoccurring in the future. So we try to gather as much as we can in that 45-minute to 60-minute meeting, so that way we can provide the youth with the best program, because we're wanting to set them up for success in the future. So the program could be a variation of different requirements. It could be community service, it could be an apology letter, there could be restitution, and so on. So one of the things that we do for this program, we have a parent satisfaction survey that we send out. So it's a 12-question survey, and 6 questions are asked of the parent, 6 questions are asked of the youth. And what we find in that survey, when it comes back to us, the most consistent feedback we receive is that the youth would like more time with the officer. And that's coming from the youth and the parent both saying that. So from that, we tried to figure out, what can we do? How can we start to provide more services internally for the youth, but then also meet that goal of, or try to meet what they are wanting is more time with the officers. So we came up with other programs to offer them, whether they're in Fresh Start or the other diversion programs that Carol mentioned. So one of those is School of Charm. That is a 10-week program where they meet every Thursday during that duration of the 10 weeks. And that is where they're going to be learning skills, life skills. So it could be financial literacy. We have an interview resume workshop. A lot of our youth will be driving soon if they're not already. So we do have a police interaction workshop in there as well. We have character building and so on. So it's all, the curriculum is basically for them to set them up for success in the future. And with that, we partnered with our faith-based organizations. And from there, they will sponsor a youth in the program. And at the end of the program, we have a social for the youth to attend, one, to celebrate them and their accomplishment of completing this program, but also to kind of work as like a networking event for them. And from the sponsorship, the sponsor takes them shopping and provides them with a professional outfit to wear to either job interviews in the future or to special events. And they will wear that to the School of Charm social. Then we created Fitness Club that runs majority of the time. That is a big hit in the summertime since kids are out of school. That is where they meet up, and they're just trying to come up with fun, interactive ways to teach team building and also confidence building. Badges for Books is a program that meets weekly. That is where we're trying to enforce critical thinking. So we've come up with different ways to do that. We have short stories that the youth will read throughout that day, and then at the end they'll break it down. And then we also have fun interactive games for them to play, where it's more of detective work, like they're solving a crime at that time. And again, it's just neat, creative way to get them to use their critical thinking skills. In addition, we have created the detention center tours. We've partnered with Anne Arundel County Detention Center, and they will walk them through the process of going through the jail. And then we have mentoring. We have decentralized mentors within the police department, and then all of the officers in the YES unit are mentors. The youth will be assigned a mentor if needed, and from there they can check in. It's kind of like a big sister, big brother type philosophy there. Community service, we've partnered with different organizations throughout our community that will allow the youth to be able to meet the requirement of their community service. And then we have mobile crisis, a drug and alcohol class, and also community conferencing.
So this brings us, we're not going to review our DART program, but this brings us to the end of our presentation. As I said in the beginning, our overall goal is to provide the youth we work with meaningful diversion programs that help them alter their behavior without criminalizing their behavior. And we're looking at ways in which we can expand our program to meet their needs on a continual basis. Questions?
All right, we'll take questions for this panel. There they went. We're going to start over here this time with Delegate Simmons. Then I'll work my way around. Delegate Simmons.
Thank you all for coming out and presenting, and I really appreciate all the hard work y'all are doing serving our youth and being innovative with your department and seeing what's coming down the line when it comes to what's taking place here with our young people. My question would be, when you center around our school-age children, do you find that you're getting a good cooperation with our schools and how y'all are running the programs, and how are the parents receptive to what's taking place?
Absolutely. We've been working with the school board over our last school year. We got involved with them. Dr. Bedell's team has been basically opened the doors for us to be able to come in. So the officers are able to go and meet with the kids in our program. They can do checks or even have lunch with them if they want. So the school board has been very supportive.
One of the things y'all talked about, rather we've been talking about, is that you find that these kids are completing the program and you're not having to deal with them again, or you having to make recontact with a large number of young people?
So for our Fresh Start, our pre-arrest diversion, that is, they only get one shot at the program. So if they do reoffend, unfortunately, they would be, charged with whatever the offense was.
Thank you.
And one thing we tell them at the social, once they graduate from the social, we actually tell them that just because they've graduated from the program, that doesn't mean that we're done with them. We always tell them they're always welcome to come back. And when we have other School of Charm classes going on, or other youth that are going through other programs, if they want to assist or mentor with us or go on these trips that we take some of the kids on, they're allowed to go. So they're not done with us if they don't want to be done with us.
Thank y'all for all the amazing work y'all are doing.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so very much for coming today. All of the Anne Arundel County delegates are just super proud that you guys are here. We love what you're doing. And I just kind of going off of what Delegate Simmons said, do you guys have any idea, are you able to track even the recidivism rate of the students who come through your program?
Yes, so we went to Apricot, a new database that helps us track that. So since September 2022, I have data from that since September 2022. So we do track 6 month and 12 month. And right now our 6 month recidivism, we're at 70%. And then our 12 month, we are at 100%.
Wow, that's awesome. And how many children do you help per year?
So it ebbs and flows. Since September 22, we have had 259 youth come through the program.
And how much does the program cost per year to operate?
A total cost, I'm not sure, because that's above my head. But we did receive a $400,000 grant that has significantly helped us to be able to purchase supplies for the diversion programs, and then also events that we can hold for the youth.
Okay, yeah, and I know you said you had nonprofit sponsors, and I think that's an awesome aspect of the program. But if anyone's able to kind of collect that number for me and get it to me later, just an estimate of like a yearly cost, that would be wonderful.
Awesome.
Thanks so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I just learned I will never share my questions with Delegate Munoz. She took all of my questions, so, no, I'm just joking. No, I still have more. I have,
Great minds think alike.
yes,
That's what she
I have a
meant to
book of
say.
questions, no. So actually, you know, our chair asked us not to make speeches, so I won't make them, but if I were to make speeches, I would say how great you all are and how happy I am with the Fresh Start program. And I'm also equally excited about the DART program. So could you please, and this is my question, could you please tell us a little bit about the DART program? I think it's very important for my colleagues to hear.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you. So we came up with DART after the recent changes in the juvenile laws. And basically we were trying to figure out how we could help. It was our proactive way of trying to help. So we do have a limited amount of youth that we can accept into the DART program just due to, you know, our limitations because the pre-arrest diversion that takes up a lot of our time. But DART is it's diverting at-risk teens. That is an officer referral, so very similar to Fresh Start, but it's for any youth that has either they've committed a crime and they're outside of the charging age for whatever crime was committed, or they are headed down a path. Like we're seeing like it's an officer that keeps going out to a house for the same youth. And maybe the youth hasn't committed a crime where they can actually be charged yet, but they know that if there's not some type of intervention, then that youth is probably going to be charged in the future. So they can vouch for the youth, send that referral through to our program, and then we will work with the kid. It's the same exact program as Fresh Start. It's just there's no charge there to kind of keep them on track.
Great. And so, how much extra do you all make for these diversion programs, the police officers?
0.
Could you say that just a little bit louder?
0.
Good job.
This is our job. Well, we get paid, you know, through the county.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's no extra incentive. I will say, and maybe I'm going off course, but the unit that we have, the officers in the unit, it is a unit that they put in for. So it is considered a specialized unit. But the passion that each officer has in this unit is unmatched.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Couple questions for myself and then I'll keep sending it around. You said 259 juveniles since September of 22. What's the capacity of the program? How many can you have at any one time?
So we haven't met a point where we've had to turn away kids. So we don't have a max capacity at this point. When we so summertime, it usually goes a little bit lower. And this is what I'm referring to Fresh Start. So for some reason, most of our referrals are from the schools. We do have referrals from patrol, but majority is from the schools. We're at 71% from schools and about 29% from patrol. But from that, it goes down in the summertime because school's out and we'll kind of get a break there. So that's why we try to enforce those other programs like Fitness Club to keep kids active throughout the summer. But as far as a max capacity, you know, we've been as high as 40 cases per officer, but we haven't met it where, I mean, obviously we need more staffing, but
40 juveniles per officer?
That's a heavy caseload.
And,
but
and
we
how many
haven't-
officers are there?
We have 6 right now.
6. Okay.
It's a lot, especially if you're looking at the biggest thing that our unit stresses is quality over quantity. And we want to make sure that we are giving each youth in our program the attention that they need. That's one thing that they're lacking in their life sometimes. They just need that extra support system. And it's not saying anything's happening that it's the fault of the parent structure or whatever is happening. It truly takes a village. It's the teachers, it's the, you know, everybody in the community. And that's one reason why School of Charm, we like to partner with the community members so they can come in and then it benefits the youth because they see that it's not just the parent, the the teacher, the police, whoever. It's the whole community is backing them and wants them to succeed.
Yes, thank you. It seems like Delegate Grammer and I are tag teaming a lot today. My question is, first of all, congratulations, you're doing God's work. That's terrific. But my question is, I'm not yet a parent, but I've been told that being a parent is the hardest job that you ever have. And I had lunch with a state's attorney yesterday, and he also said sometimes parents of these types of individuals are at their wit's end. So do you provide any support for the parents, classes, etc.? Because I would imagine some of the problems are at home, and that these parents could really, it's important to work with the kids, but do you provide any support for the parents? Thanks.
Right now, what we can offer is referral for other services. I'm sure most of you are aware of our robust crisis response system. We can do a direct referral with them and connect with crisis response to help provide additional services. We are partnering with Anne Arundel Luminous Pathways, Anne Arundel Medical Center, to develop a drug and alcohol education class for the youth. We still have a number of youth who come to us for alcohol and CDS violations. We are working with Pathways to develop an education class that will have an education component for the parents as well.
And a second bite at the apple, Mr. Chair, just simply, what's a CES violation? Because not all of us here are lawyers.
Right. It is a drug violation.
Okay, thanks.
Mr. Chair, and thanks for being here today. I've talked a little bit about boundaries today, and a lot of people I've talked about when dealing with diversion services complain about the lack of boundaries, the binding or non-binding nature of a service. And I have a couple questions therein. How many, we've passed the law that precludes arrest based on age. How many juvenile incidents in your jurisdiction have occurred where the law precluded an arrest?
Yeah, I don't have that data.
We'd have
Yeah.
to come back and look up that data and get it back to you, sir. We don't have it this time.
Okay. So Fresh Start, for example, offers program in lieu of charges. And I've heard criticisms from my jurisdiction, but also of your jurisdiction. You know, you're saying it's kind of like a trade-off. We'll give you the diversion, we'll alleviate the charge as long as you participate. But I have heard from not only my jurisdiction, but your jurisdiction, there is a crime committed, they agree to the program, and then they never participate. So you're saying in every example here, the youth that you're dealing with are always accepting diversion when they've received kind of this alternate course?
Yes, so there's no option for, okay, so it's a voluntary program. They can take the charge in lieu of not participating in the program. But if they come into this program, they're going to work the program. That's why they're partnered with or paired up with an officer, and the officer, one of our guidelines is they have to do a check-in weekly. It is very similar to probation in a sense of there's a very strict guideline here. But the biggest goal is to be able to, one, again, those resources, link them with resources, and then two, redivert that behavior. We want them to, we want to see that change, because obviously that's kind of telling us that we're doing what's right or the program's working.
How do you account for that?
As far as the program?
So you've got X number of youth, you're working with them, you want to make sure they're adhering. How do you account for that?
So they're told in the meeting up front that, you know, this is voluntary. The guardian is there too, and they hear that. They sign a paper that before the meeting's over, that states what the requirements are, and then the date that they have to complete that program. All of that's set on the paper, and it's like a contract between us. From there, the officer will, because it's not a perfect situation, right? Like sometimes we're dealing with youth, or just the human element of it in general. We're gonna have good days, bad days with the youth. If there's days where they're just not wanting to participate in an event that we have or whatever, depends. Some events are mandatory, some are not. They're the more fun ones that we are able to provide through the grant funding. Then those are ones that they don't have to, but we're upfront with them. If you do not do what's required, then you will be charged with whatever the offense was that you came in. And then we try to just emphasize with them the importance of all the good things that, like, focus on the good of what this program's doing for you, which means that charge would go away. And then all of the extra stuff that you're able to be a part of from this program. So yeah, you may have done something that's bad, but we can turn this into a positive, and we just try to enforce that as much as possible. Just remind them of that, to focus on the positive, what's coming through this program. And we get a lot of buy-in from the youth for that. Plus, again, going back on the passion of the officers in this program, it's amazing. Every officer comes with something that they bring to the unit, and whether it be their life experience, whatever their background is, and just their interests, we're able to break down barriers with the youth in our program that kind of gets them to just buy in with us more. And I think that comes out in the survey when we're seeing they want to spend more time with the officers.
Okay, so just the response to the criticism is through the follow-up of the officers in the program. That's kind of the enforcement mechanism. You signed up to do this. We're going to follow up with you, and that's how you make sure they're participating.
Yeah, and working with their guardians as well, because the guardians, at times will keep them on track as well. So
thank you.
Thank you. In the spirit of the chairman's love, I say happy holidays, everyone. Thanks for being here on this critical issue. My question is about peer pressure. Is there a prevalent fear of peer violence and intimidation for any of the youth that get involved in this program? Because I know how big of a force that plays in a young person's mind. Does that affect this program? And if so, how do you address it?
So I haven't really seen it too much. We did have one youth that I can think of at the top of my head, that every now and then would be like, they didn't want to be around police, but over time,
So I would say it's peer pressure the other way, where some of the kids that are there are having such a good time and they see that one that's kind of not being involved. The peer pressure works the other way. They're like, hey, come on, we're actually having fun. We're enjoying this. Be a part of this. So it kind of works the other way.
That's wonderful news. Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much for being here today and presenting to the committee. We greatly appreciate it. Appreciate your time.
thank you.
Thank you.
We're now going to hear from the Youth Services Bureaus and hear from Liz Park, who is coming up. Following this will be Jacob's Ladder, and then the Choice Program, and then Roca. So we're going to have a different PowerPoint presentation. Try to keep the presentation under about 10 minutes. That would be great. And as, well, I was going to do something else, but the vice chair left the room. And so I'll do that again in a minute. All right. Are you ready?
I am ready.
Please go ahead.
All right. Thank you all for allowing me to come and speak about youth service bureaus. You may have heard of youth service bureaus. We've been around for a long time. So I'm really thrilled to be able to come back and speak in front of you all. And those who don't know about us, I'm happy to help you understand who youth service bureaus are and our history. So our mission statement really is to promote the dignity and inherent worth of all of Maryland's children and to make sure that all children succeed in Maryland and go on to have successful lives and get the services that they need. We are committed to serving diverse youth and stand against systemic and interpersonal racism, discrimination and oppression. And we really work, as you've heard a lot about trauma. And so we're working to heal the trauma people may have experienced in their lives. Youth service bureaus were established back in the 1970s. So we've been around in Maryland for a very long time. They are a state and local government partnership is how they were designed. So the state through statute designates a certain amount of funding, and then the local government, whether that's a county government or municipal government, is required to do a 25% match. Over time, the local government match has well exceeded that 25% match because that partnership has been so strong and successful in helping provide services to youth. Our main mission is really in statute. We are meant to be the prevention arm of juvenile services. So to keep kids out of the juvenile services, the kids that you've heard of, where they may be headed towards juvenile services, and to keep them from going down that pathway. Consistently over time, and this has been going on, I've been with youth service bureaus over 30 years, and long before that, we do a 2-year follow-up study through the Department of Juvenile Services, and consistently, so it's after ending services with a youth service bureau 2 years later, 95% of the youth that we serve have not been adjudicated delinquent. So we feel very proud of that statistic and that we've been consistent with that statistic over time. And again, that's done through our partnership with Juvenile Services. They do the analysis for us. We work with families facing a variety of problems, whether that's family conflict, child abuse, mental health, emotional problems like anger, anxiety, depression, grief, behavioral problems, whether that's impulse control, violence, cruelty to animals, if they're having school problems, truancy, suspensions, substance use disorders, and then maybe it's a community issue of delinquency or fire setting. It is our goal to work with any family that walks in the door, and we really try not to turn away a youth. We are really community-based organizations. We don't specialize in one topic or the other. We really want to serve each youth and family as they come in. Historically, youth service bureaus were located across the state. So in our heyday, we were across the state, and we had 21 bureaus serving youth across the state. Unfortunately, over time, especially under the last administration, we went from about 17 in 2015 to now there's 7 left due to funding cuts. And so that was really cuts to services that were providing mental health services and wraparound services to youth across the state. And again, was that state local government partnership that has ended in many jurisdictions. So as you can see, we still have a bureau in Baltimore County, Carroll County, and in Prince George's County, there's a very strong commitment to these bureaus. So there's still 5 in Prince George's County. And one of the real strengths in Prince George's County is that they're hooked to the municipalities. And so the municipalities have been able to really support these intervention and prevention services in Prince George's. Just to give you a snapshot of when we had a larger amount of bureaus serving across the state, we served 4,600 informal counseling, which means that's mental health services where the youth and the family are coming in weekly to get family counseling and services. Another 1,400 in informal counseling, which means they maybe came in for some crisis services. Maybe we're only seeing up to 4 sessions, and then maybe that's all they needed, or they referred on to some other programs. 2,000 received crisis intervention or suicide prevention services, and then another 1,700 received substance abuse assessment and referral services. In Prince George's County, the youth service bureaus are some of the only agencies that provide drug and alcohol assessments for the school system. So if a youth is caught at school for a first offense for either being under the influence or having something with them, they come to us and we do a 2-session assessment with the youth and their family to determine what other services they may need. And that may be family counseling, that may be tutoring, that may need bullying services, depending on what that child needs, we're able to provide that service. Beyond our core services, based on community need, and as you've heard from the different communities here, we have a variety of other services that we offer. At my agency in Greenbelt, we have GED preparation classes, tutoring services, we do parenting classes, we do school-based psychoeducation classes, we do food assistance, housing assistance, in Bowie, and I know Delegate Taylor was there yesterday, they have a tremendous mentoring program that they partner with Bowie High School to target kids at risk of that are in middle school or showing signs of maybe not being successful in high school, maybe skipping a lot or not being engaged in school. And they have a mentoring program where they start with them in 8th grade and they follow them through to graduation. And they've had a tremendous success with that program and keeping youth engaged in school and keeping them be successful in graduating. And then we offer a variety of community events, again, because we're part of our municipalities or we're part of the community that we're in, maybe holiday events. I know at my agency, we do a food distribution for the holidays. We do a Santa program where kids and families can get gifts and things. So we try and serve the whole family beyond our core services being mental health services. We are evidence-based, and so we use evidence-based practices in providing our services. So just one thing I always have to plug, because I'm trained as a marriage and family therapist, is that family therapy is an evidence-based practice, and it's the best practice when working with kids. You want to engage the whole family, whatever that family looks like, whoever their caregivers are. They need to be involved in the process because they often, as you've heard today, need as much support as the child does. And they need help learning new behaviors, learning how to manage the child, and offering new resources. So some of the evidence-based practices that we use: cognitive behavioral family therapy, trauma-focused cognitive behavioral therapy, which I know other people spoke about today. So that's a specific model for working with kids who've experienced trauma. EMDR, which is used a lot with PTSD. And it's called eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. It was really designed originally to use with war vets, but they found it very successful for many kinds of trauma, to helping people get past those nightmares, the repetitive thoughts, the things that kind of keep people stuck from a trauma. Filial family therapy, parent-child interactive therapy, both of those therapies target younger children. So PCIT, the parent-child interactive therapy, was designed specifically for young children, so 2 to 7, who are at risk of being kicked out of their preschool or their school system for their behaviors. And we found that model very successful. It literally trains the parent how to work with the child in a different way to change those behaviors. So again, we want to start as early as we can to divert kids from developing problem behaviors later in life. And the motivational enhancement therapy is one of the model therapies used in substance use treatment. So Maryland youth service bureaus have been cost effective for Maryland over the years. Historically, the youth service bureaus have leveraged local dollars, which have increased the services to the youth, as I spoke about before. And we're able to get grants and other opportunities because we have that base funding from the state. And historically, we leverage another $11 to $12 million on top of the money we receive from the state. And so that's my presentation today. And I'm happy to answer questions.
Go to Delegate Taylor first.
Thank you, Liz. It was a pleasure meeting with you yesterday. And I think I'd like for you to emphasize something for us. Slide 11, I think it is. It talks about your impact. So at your heyday, right? You served, you were able to offer all that's shown here, and I won't go over it.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to go back in time here.
So what was your funding at this level?
So at that level, we were receiving $2.4 million from the state across then the 21 bureaus.
So for $2.4 million, you were able to offer all of these services.
Yes.
What are you asking for now, this year?
So we requested from the governor to restore us to 2.4 million so that we could fund the current existing 7 bureaus and reopen or connect with some of the bureaus that were closed in the other jurisdictions.
And your heyday, you had 21 youth service bureaus in 11 jurisdictions.
Yes, ma'am.
And right now you only have 7.
In 3 jurisdictions.
Thank you.
Yep.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good seeing you, Liz. Follow up with what Delegate Taylor was just stating. So 2.4 million, what are you receiving now from the state?
As I was listening to people, I was like, I should have that number and I don't have it in my head.
Okay.
But it is less than 500,000.
Wow. Okay. Wow. Okay, that would explain the severe cuts. And then you mentioned partnerships with the school system. I know, especially in Prince George's County. Where does most of your referrals come from? Is it solely school-based, or is it a combination of school, judicial, law enforcement? Just wanted to get a better sense of that.
Sure. So the majority of our referrals do come from schools because we are connected to the schools. We also get referrals from our community partners. Families themselves may call us. We may get, because we're in Comar under juvenile services, we can get referrals from juvenile services also. Juvenile services will sometimes get a call, please come take my child, even though my child's done nothing, and they can refer them to a youth service bureau and connect them to us to get those services. So we take them in Greenbelt. We have our own police department. So we get, at my agency, referrals from our police department. So they can come from anywhere in the community.
Well, thank you. I think you guys do amazing work, and thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for that presentation. I really appreciate the answer that you're currently being funded at less than $500,000. And how many youth are you serving per year with that budget?
Right. And I should have pulled those numbers together, and I don't have that off the top of my head, but I can get that for you.
Yeah, if you could send that to us, that'd be helpful. And then do you have any idea of like a recidivism rate for youth that are referred to you?
So again, it was the 95% when we do our 2-year follow-up study with the Department of Juvenile Services.
After
95% after 2 years have not adjudicated.
That's wonderful. And then just to clarify, so you we've kind of heard from diversion programs that are sort of post the police, like post DJS, and then also pre anything, going on their record. And so you kind of do both. Is that correct?
Yes, but the majority of ours, the pre, we're trying to keep kids from going into the system, or if they've had a contact, to keep them from going back into the system.
Okay. But you deal with children who are pre-sentencing and post, or just pre?
Both.
Both. Okay, that was my question. Thank you so much.
So what is your child to staff ratio? Like, what's their caseload like?
So each agency is a little bit different, but because they're family therapy sessions, so the caseload is often for one full-time person, would be a caseload of 15 to 20 families.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So you mentioned the word therapy a couple times, family therapy, et cetera. Now, is this kind of like mentoring and coaching, or is this more of like a psychiatric, licensed kind of mental health treatment?
Right, great question. So all of the bureaus have licensed mental health providers to provide the therapy.
Do you have, is this something you provide, or do you contract this out to?
We provide it directly.
Okay. Oh, wow. So you provided yourself with $500,000. Wow. Okay. Thank you so much.
Again, it's that partnership with the local government. So the local governments also put in their piece to help support the programs. Yeah.
I don't mean to be totally oblivious here, but just to be clear, is this a state agency? Are you a state agency, or you're a not-for-profit operating outside of state government?
We operate outside of state government, but many of us are part of the municipal government that partners with the state, and then some of it's county government that then a nonprofit receives the funds.
Got it. Okay. Delegate Conaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming in and give us your presentation. I believe I heard you say something about some sort of eye therapy or something.
PCIT, it's parent-child interactive therapy.
And that's going to be, what does that have to do? You said eye therapy.
Oh, the EMDR. The EMDR, the eye movement.
Yes. What is that?
So that is specific therapy that was developed to help overcome trauma symptoms. And so it's a therapy model where people are taught coping mechanisms, and then there's some light bars that are used to help clear almost like the pathways and neural pathways that are established in trauma, and create new neural pathways in your brain so that you don't consistently go back to the traumatic experience.
Okay, so if I may, this will help out with environmental trauma, consistent environmental trauma?
Yes, I can.
Thank you so very much.
Yep.
All right. We thank you very much for your presentation today. Thank you. Well, your light wasn't on.
So the Youth Services Bureau, is that the one that's in District Heights?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. Let's talk more about that offline. That's in my district. And I know the state funded it many years ago.
Thank you very much. Ms. Park. Now we'll hear from Jacob's Ladder from Prince George's County, but
Yes, no, the captain's not here today.
captain's not here. All right,
Yes.
that's fine. Whoever would like to begin with about a 10-minute presentation, that'd be great.
Yeah, sure. First of all, good afternoon. I'm Gerald Jordan, the Executive Director of Jacob's Ladder Youth Foundation. We're a nonprofit organization. We're a community-based program. We primarily do our work in Prince George's County. We have a lot of different programs within Jacob's Ladder. Our main focus is public safety and recidivism, in particular when it comes down to juveniles. We have a juvenile reentry program, diversion program that we put the majority of our efforts into. Then we also have other programming, academic enrichment. We have a trade career program, and the programs again just focus on academic enrichment. Next one. Okay, this right here is who we are. Again, the programs that we have, and what we do is educate and reduce the number of juveniles that enter and return to the juvenile justice systems. As we go to number 3 on this one, we reduce crime, poverty, and chronic unemployment in Prince George's County with the programs that we present and provide to our juveniles. The juveniles within our juvenile reentry program come from the Department of Juvenile Justice. The juveniles are court ordered to attend our program through their community programming with their evening reporting center. And we have them twice a week, and we have them 12 months out a year. During the summers, we have the summer camps for them, and we do a lot of field trips. And they get exposed to, again, a lot of different trade academies, field trips with Cheney Construction, so they can learn about the construction trade. We've taken a trip down to the National Harbor so they can understand the STEM and physics of the Capitol wheel and how it operates. And with our academic enrichment, what we really do is focus on STEM. If you go to the academic enrichment, we focus on STEM programs, and that's very interactive for them. With aviation, we have Captain Manning. That's our newest program that we introduced during the summer months. And it introduced the kids to the aviation portion of it. We took them on a field trip to Fort Belvoir in Virginia this summer, and they got to tour the airfield and understand more about the aircrafts, and again, the STEM and the physics when it comes down to the aviation field. One thing we like to do is expose the youth that we come into our program, and the exposure is so they can just understand and experience different career and educational paths, so they can just have productive futures. And again, we have Kenny Hooks. I meant to introduce him when we first came up. He's with us. I got right into the presentation. He's doing a wonderful job advancing the slides. But I would just like to bring Kenny Hooks in to see if he has anything to say. He works extremely close with the program.
Yeah, I am Kenny Hooks, of course. Thanks, Mr. Jordan. Thanks for the opportunity. I am a community partner, Prince George's County. I'm also a Temple Hills. I'm the HOA president of one of the communities there, as well as partnering with Jacob's Ladder has been great because they are at a unique situation because they're just beginning. And they're listening to their community, and they're also partnering with people that are vested in their communities. So therefore, from what we're doing, Captain Manning, also with the Men in the Gap. The Men in the Gap is a program with returning citizens that are looking to partner with Jacob's Ladder, have partnership with Jacob's Ladder, as well as mentor the youth or the Department of Juvenile Services. There are also other programs such as Charlotte's Web, which is also Enrichment Center, which is a program that does boxing techniques. And that draws the kids in because they want to learn self-defense as well as they do therapy. But the biggest thing with Jacob's Ladder is that they are passionate about their community and they're showing it. So as a community partner, I'm here with you to make a difference.
Do appreciate it. Going back to our Trade Career Academy, if you could get to that slide, it's towards the middle of the Trade Career Academy.
This one?
Yeah, no, I'm jumping around. On that, with the Trade Career Academy, the kids are introduced to several trades, again, We have a lot of tradesmen that come in, certified tradesmen that come in and introduce them to different skills for workforce development so they can have productive futures and sustain themselves in life as well. They introduced the carpentry, electrical, HVAC, construction, as I mentioned, Cheney Enterprises over the summer. And we even did a sustainable living program at a local farm over the spring that was very enlightening for the kids. And again, the programs we introduced them to is definitely for self-sustainability, but also just so they can just have productive futures. And most importantly, just making sure it's just giving the kids hope. And that's what they need. As we're interacting with the kids, we're finding out, of course, and we're trying to be really creative and figure out a parenting mechanism, because that's one thing that we really need to focus, concentrate, and get creative on, is this parenting piece when it comes down to the juveniles that we deal with. And we just want more parent involvement. We're having, great conversations about how we should try to introduce our parenting piece with any kind of enforcement. That would be great. I know it's a lot of talk going on with the parents when it comes down to these juveniles, but that's definitely critical. If you could go to the numbers.
Right.
This one. Yeah. And just to break down some numbers for you, just with some data that we have, the academic enrichment, we served 160 youth, and we're also inside of Friendly High School that we have about 40 youth on a weekly basis with the aviation program. Have a great relationship with Prince George's County High School. And as far as our juvenile reentry, we served 110 youth so far in 2023 with our juvenile reentry program. And again, these are kids that are court ordered through the Department of Juvenile Services, through the Evening Reporting Center on Bright Seat Road, ERC. And we're finding out that most of the kids that come through have handgun charges, carjackings, robberies of the sort. So they're definitely violent juvenile offenders. Anything else?
So, as far as we talked about the parent involvement piece. As we know, it starts at home. As a community partner, our wish is to create legislation whereas the parents are more involved, especially when it comes to the juvenile services, as far as their court order, what's in their court orders, and to hold, almost essentially holding the parent accountable, because you got neglect from social service, you got them being held accountable for neglect, abuse, but why, some kind of way, I don't know, how can they be held accountable for their kids coming outside and committing these crimes? Those are one of the things that we're talking about, parent engagement. That's a part of that parent engagement, getting them involved with their youth. If they have to be court ordered, they have to be court ordered. If they don't want to do it on their own, as a community partner, that's what we would like to see. Participate in a Jacob's Ladder, participate in a YAP program, participate because it's necessary.
And just to close, we have a lot of partners that in the community that help us out. We have mental health organizations. We have returning citizens that come back and talk to the youth about how they successfully rehabilitated themselves and turned their lives around. But we have a tremendous amount of support in Prince George's County and state of Maryland to help out with our mission. And I think we're done. Any questions?
Delegate Tolles.
Just wanted to say hello and thank you for the work that you do. I'm very familiar with what you do, and I appreciate the work. Just a question for you, Jarrell, have you seen, let me phrase it this way. What are some of the crimes that you've seen in Prince George's County and really throughout the state of Maryland that you are seeing our youth get into that are coming through your program?
Yes, handguns, gun offenses, carjackings, robberies, the assaults with guns, shootings. Those are the most prevalent. Cars, vehicles, always the hot topic right now. But that's the range that we're seeing. Anything that you're seeing as they come through?
Because, like I said, robberies. robberies are what we see a lot. And car thefts. Those are the biggest things in our community.
And have you seen an increase over the last few years in that?
Absolutely, yes.
One final question, Mr. Chair. Do you think, do you believe that curfew legislation would be appropriate and would be helpful to getting our youth out of the community at different times, like in the evening? It would be during the evening. Do you feel a change in the curfew laws or some type of fines associated with the curfew laws would help to decrease the criminal activity that you are seeing in the community?
I believe so. In Prince George's County, there's definitely curfew laws. I'm not too sure how, strictly they're enforced. I know there's always manpower issues with a lot of different agencies that, enforce the curfew laws. But I think right now, anything that we can truly enforce, any legislation laws that we have, we should utilize. But I do think it's effective. So I think we should just, continue to try to, I guess, make the curfew laws, more enforceable, or definitely just continue to enforce what we have.
Okay, wonderful. I've already spoken to Chief Aziz, so I'll be reaching out to you to come back to this committee, hopefully to testify in support of legislation I plan to do.
Right.
Thank you,
Appreciate it.
Mr.
Yes.
Chair. Thank you. A point of personal privilege, just to recognize my new senator.
I don't think he belongs in this building anymore.
No.
He doesn't belong over here. He works somewhere else.
That was perfect. You did it. Well, he's trying to see what JPR, he's trying to get a feel, but he's getting
We are
ready.
nothing like JPR.
There you go. You did it. Done. I'm done.
So nice to see you, whatever you are, Charles. That's fine. I'm going to go to Delegate Munoz, Delegate Conaway, and then I'm going to come back to Delegate Moon down there. Delegate Simmons. Delegate Munoz, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you so much for coming today. You guys have a really inspiring program. I'm really excited to hear about all the work you're doing. I just wanted to ask, I see you have so many different programs, so I don't know if you can give me kind of an answer overall, or if it's like broken out into different, specialized programs, but like, especially for the diversion program and the reentry program, I'm curious if you guys have capacity limits that you're aware of right now in those programs.
Well, with Jacob's Ladder, our staff can handle roughly 30, okay, as far as at a time.
30 at a time?
Yes.
And so how many per year you think? Do you have that number?
Yes, I do. With juvenile reentry, we had 110 for 2023. So that's roughly 10 a month that comes down. And when they come, of course, they're with the case managers or probation officers.
And you
So
said that was reentry?
yes, that's juvenile reentry. And the diversion program in 2023, it was 68 youth.
Okay. And then do you know the budgets for those programs that you guys are working under?
Yes, our overall budget, organizational budget is 300,000.
Wow, per year.
Yes.
And you're doing all of that.
Yes, we are. And again, with the help of community partners.
That's phenomenal.
Yes.
I think you might win. I asked everyone that question. I think you might be doing the most good for the least amount of money. So congratulations.
Appreciate it.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, panel, for coming in to testify. Quickly, what is the STEM in physics? How does that work?
Well, we do the STEM education because it's very interactive. We believe in getting the kids up out of their seats, hands involved versus just being lectured to. The physics, and like I said that with the big wheel, the capital wheel down at the harbor. And it's just the science and the technology that makes the big wheel operate.
So you talk to the people in your program about how it operates and the function and all of that?
We take a field trip. So we take them actually down there and we enjoy the afternoon, grab some pizza, and then they get a tour from tour guides that work down there with the Peterson's group down at the National Harbor. So they get a tour, get a ride. It's a whole afternoon that we spend down there.
Okay, and now on the parent participation, you say it starts at home, but how the parents going to deal with the curfew laws if the children don't want to obey the curfew laws? Like if you're supposed to be in the house at 10 and you're outside at 9 and you're down at the harbor, your parents don't know where you are. So then you're going to hold the parents accountable. I mean, you use the plural parents, and some people don't have parents or active parents. So who are you talking about holding accountable for these children or for these people that are violating these curfews that you're so much in support of?
So I want to understand your question as far as the curfew.
How are you going to hold these how do you justify holding these parents accountable for their children, that they can't control their children might not understand. We don't even know where they are as far as educationally. So they don't know that they're doing something, they're harming their own self. When if you have a person that doesn't understand that they're harming themselves, you have two types of problems, in my opinion. But I just want to get your opinion.
No, I agree with you. And like I said, they're not aware that they're harming themselves. For what we want to do is to see what the parents need, to give them support, to give them the resources so they can understand, okay, what's hurtful. So they can get a clear picture of what might be hurtful and what it is to be an effective parent, the necessary tools.
You just want to make sure the parents know the direction they're going in, there's someone there to support them, and we can work on this together. Is that what you're trying to say?
That's the first start.
It's first start. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have similar kinds of questions about the parental accountability as you raised it. Excuse me. And really try to understand what you mean by the term diversion. Are these cases pulled out of the court system in some way when you say diversion, or like the officer is sending them in some pre-charge, like they've not been charged? Or are these cases actually being are they actually in the system and they are being tracked, and they could be formal if say the parents or the child is not participating or whatever? I'm curious what the actual setup is and what you mean by diversion.
Right. So the diversion side of our programming is when juveniles are referred to us through other community partners. It could be school, it could be community centers, church, and also if they're introduced to the criminal justice system, just an introduction, very minor, not a serious criminal style offense. That's the diversion. So we can try to help them get back on track before they do face serious charges.
All right. And so the people that you were referring to who had mostly handguns and carjacking issues, are those the same people?
No, that's our juvenile reentry. That's different.
That's so because I was curious mainly about the handgun possession situation and whether some of those kids are part of your diversion program, or whether you're only encountering the kids with handguns if they've come in through the system somehow.
Right. So so to clarify, there's two separate groups.
Yeah.
And when I'm speaking of the juveniles with the handguns, it's coming from Department of Juvenile Services. Those charges, that's our juvenile reentry. They've been removed from their houses, removed from their households, and were detained.
So you're only, I got it. So these are kids, maybe their only offense was possession of a handgun itself. Like they hadn't necessarily used it in some other encounter.
And if they were removed from their household and were detained, juvenile reentry.
Okay, so this is very far along the formal process when you're encountering them. Okay, sorry, I'm just trying to understand the populations. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah, so thank you. So do y'all have any relationship or partnership with CPS in reference to referrals or working with them with dealing with high-risk youth?
Yes, CPS with Prince George's County, Department of Social Services, a lot of different agencies within Prince George's County and the state of Maryland. So we have a relationship with them.
Thank y'all for what you do.
Thank you.
Thank you. So for clarification, for what involvement or legislation you're looking for parents, are you talking about that you want court ordered the parents are required to be involved with the program, or court ordered involved with the children? Or are you asking for them to be held accountable? Are you talking about parents that you feel are actually responsible for the crimes the kids are committing? And if you could add in there, like, what's that child to staff ratio, I'd appreciate it.
What we're looking at in legislation is accountability as well as support. We do see a lot of non-support from the parents. Is Jacob's Ladder has a component where it's parent engagement, and we got therapists they got therapists that come on site to have parenting classes and therapists to come on site. So whenever we do legislation, okay, this part of this program, it requires a parent to be a part of it. So yes, you should come too, because your youth has to be attend, because the court says. And that, I think that established support as well as, engagement as well.
So the ability of like the juvenile system, like the social services system, to kind of force that participation, to have orders for the parents, not just for the child.
Unfortunately, yes. Unfortunately, yes.
Okay.
Yeah.
And what is the staff to kid ratio? How many kids per?
Well,
30.
yeah, currently roughly 30, and with the juvenile reentry, again, we have to have the proper supervision from the Department of Juvenile, from DJS. So I would say 30, and probably like we have a staff of like 10 that's there. Okay, then the probation officers, the case managers, probably around 5. Yes.
5
caseload
caseload or the 30 caseload?
30.
5 staff?
No, 5 staff members from the Department of Juvenile Services.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
We appreciate your time today. Appreciate you coming to speak to us. Thank you.
Thank you.
you very, very much.
Yes.
Really
Thank you for the
appreciate it.
opportunity.
All right, 2 more groups. One, Kelly Quinn from the Choice Program at UMBC, who's here. While Hunter, oh, I don't see him over there. Well, yeah, well, it's possible the vice chair has a new chief of staff, but he's not in the room right now for us to welcome him yet. But if Kelly's ready, we'll do that. Maybe we'll do that between the next groups. All right, Kelly Quinn.
Hi, everybody.
All right.
I am a resident of D46, so I am ably represented by Chairman Clippinger. Thank you for having me today. Yes, I'm proud. And I'm also proud to be a Marylander, because the Human Rights for Kids campaign said we're the most improved in the nation. So thank you. If you were here in 2022 and voted for the JJRA, we're better than Arkansas, everybody. And I would love it if we could be most improved 2 years in a row by passing the Yes Act in 24. So see you then. Thank you, neighbor. I am Kelly Quinn. I am the Deputy Director of the Choice Program, and I am also the chairperson of the Maryland Coalition to Reform School Discipline. And I'm so glad that Kate Bryant said earlier something that we know to be true, that most youth age out of crime. And ours is one organization that helps them through that transitional period. We provide mentoring, support, and advocacy. We are, in fact, the only university-based program that you're going to hear from today. And I think we're an excellent example of interagency cooperation between the University System of Maryland and the Department of Juvenile Services, as well as we enjoy support from the Governor's Office of Crime Prevention, Youth and Victim Services, and the Family League of Baltimore City. We also receive public dollars from Baltimore County. Thank you so much for that. When one of our mentors asked Jaden, a 15-year-old from Western Baltimore County, how he describes himself, he says that he's friendly and hardworking. His friends say about themselves that they're impressionable, inspired, and independent. They also say that they're creative, responsible, hardworking, strong, and smart. They want to be helpful and they want to make an impact. And in fact, Choice Youth last year provided 1,700 hours of community service to the state of Maryland with their mentors, either to fulfill their high school graduation requirements or as a condition of their supervision with the Department of Juvenile Services. We were founded in Baltimore City in 1987, and our ideas and services and our service model is really born out of our work here in Maryland. We serve up to 175 youth at a time. We're contracted by the Department of Juvenile Services to serve 450 young people over the course of a year. We have a $3.2 million budget from the DJS, and as I mentioned earlier, we do also provide support. We also receive support from GOCP, YBS, the Family League, and Baltimore County. We've also been able to leverage those public dollars with some private corporation gifts, like from Northrop Grumman, for example. We have enjoyed in the past foundation support from OSI, RIP in Baltimore, and the Annie Casey Foundation. We use an evidence-informed approach. All of our mentors, AmeriCorps members, or trained staff are prepared to do the work because they're trained in motivational interviewing. That vein of research was started by Professor Carlo Di Clemente, a faculty member at UMBC, and we hired him in fiscal year 22 to design a goal planning strategy series of modules to work with our staff. So we have some of the best in the nation training our staff and AmeriCorps members to help young people understand what their own goals are. We use motivational interviewing as a way to help young people identify their own SMART goals. One of our goals always is to meet the conditions of their probation or their pre-court contracts. The others could be things like getting a driver's license, getting a job, getting a library card. Our mentors help our young people do that kind of work. We see them 3 times a week when they're first referred to us by DJS, and then we step down over time. And I'd love to at some point talk to you over a cup of coffee about why we meant from seeing young people 7 days a week, 365 days a year, to seeing them 3 times a week. One person alluded to this earlier. We know that surveillance does not work, and that punishment and over-policing does not work with young people. And that if you can form a protective factor, like a mentoring relationship with a caring adult, you can mitigate urban ACEs and ACEs, and you can mitigate the kind of mistakes that they've made. The young people we work with always say, don't judge us by the worst day of our lives. And so we try and be with them on the everyday aspects of their lives. And some of the kinds of things we do are provide case management. And then also I have a couple things for Delegates Kaufman and Pasteur and Tolles. I know you all care a lot about education and routinely ask questions about education. One of the things that our mentors do is go to schools and help young people and their families with IEP and 504 hearings and appointments. So I wanted to let you know that, and I have more to say about our role with education. We also provide accompaniment to court, transportation to events. And once we've done a welcome meeting with families in their own homes, then the whole household could access our support after this welcome meeting. We have lots of fun activities as well as the kind of serious case management and helping get young people through the youth legal system. This past summer, our young people themselves and their mentors identified our own summer engagement strategy that included trips to urban air, Six Flags, bird watching in Baltimore City and Herring Run Park, rock climbing, and playing games in order to get ready for their driver's permits. Sometimes we take young people to museums. They do those community service hours, and we also have guest speakers in the program. All of the young people in our program, and we serve those in Prince George's, Montgomery, Howard, Baltimore County and Baltimore City. All of those young people could participate in one of our virtual 7-session jobs training programs. And upon the completion of it, they can receive $175 for their participation. In Baltimore City and Baltimore County, the DJS involved youth could receive a potential referral to one of our 3 social enterprises. We have a cafe at University of Baltimore Law School, and then we sell to Harker Brothers ice cream at both ends of Conway Street at Oriole Park at Camden Yards, and also in the Inner Harbor at a kiosk. Each of our staff in the DJS side of our work carries a caseload of up to 15 youth at a time. In addition to this intensive advocacy that we provide for the DJS youth the youth who are involved with DJS, we also provide supported employment. In fiscal year 23. We provided $124,000 to youth in terms of stipends and wages for the 60 youth who worked at our social enterprises. This is one path to employment for them. Youth may be referred to us through the Department of Juvenile Services, and then also because we have that supplemental funding from GOCP YVS and the Family League of Baltimore City, we're able to take up to 110 other young people who are referred to us by the community in Prince George's and in Baltimore County and Baltimore City. One distinctive feature of our programming, as I mentioned, is that we are housed institutionally at UMBC. And if we want to take seriously minimizing the school and ending the school to prison pipeline, we want to introduce kids to the possibility of college. And so we regularly have these events called college nights that they're held at Loyola and also at UMBC, where college students, many of whom are enrolled in a living learning community through UMBC Shriver Center, meet with and work with young people on a weekly basis. All the young people seem to love tan food. They come for everything that's deep fried. First stop is the cafeteria. Give me some chicken tenders and some French fries, and then let's head off to a college classroom. Last night they were studying the solar system at UMBC. This Thursday, they're going to the radio station at Loyola, and then they can hit the rec centers at each of the facilities. We also use arts in some very important ways. We know that self-expression is important, but so is emotional regulation, and that we have a regular tradition of having a mosaic making project from Artivate in Montgomery County as one of our spring break programs. We also do work in poetry and drawing and poetry. Poetry, drawing, and beat making. Finally, we have a youth advisory board that provides us information, and in fact, one aid and work this summer on developing that youth engagement, the summer engagement strategy. I think maybe I've answered and tried to anticipate most of the questions that people have been asking, but I did want to flag in my role with the Coalition to Reform School Discipline and the kind of work that we do at Choice is as an advocacy agency that's interested in systems change, we're also looking for the barriers that young people experience. And so if our mentors notice patterns and changes over time, they bring that to our attention and we take that to coalition work. And so for those of you, especially Delegate Kaufman and Pastor and Tolles, because I've heard you ask these questions before, I want you to know that when members of the coalition recently assessed the recent MSDE data, we see that suspensions are up. And what we know is that for young people involved in the youth legal system, this is part of school pushout. They're higher than they were pre-pandemic, higher than they've been since 2013, higher than and remember in 2014, we passed legislation that made sure we had due process protections. Heartbreakingly, pre-K to second graders, suspensions are up. And so if we are concerned about the school to prison pipeline, we in Choice are watching what's happening with the young people we mentor and advocate. And when we go to their IEP hearings, and we want you to know about this. I'd be happy at some other time to talk more in my, like, wearing my scarf instead of my hat, as the Coalition to Reform School Discipline, to talk about those alarming numbers. But I really wanted to be here today, talk not just about our direct services, but the kind of advocacy work that we do at the Choice program.
All right, thank you very much. Now with questions about the Choice program, we'll start with Delegate Tolles.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Well, you said my name, so I have to ask you a
Yes.
question. Thank you. So, just really quickly, do you, for the, in terms of the, is it minorities where the suspensions are going up for K through two?
I'm really glad you asked that. Yeah, so it's, we don't quite know what the trend will be.
Mhm.
We don't see that inequity either for disability, students with disabilities, or right now for racial and ethnic disparities, but it's only a 1 year data point. So we're going to have to see in a kind of longer way what's happening there.
Definitely keep me updated,
will.
because I know it could be, again, our kids come to school with trauma and may need
That's
some
right.
different services instead of being suspended
That's
as
right.
a punishment. So I would like to stay updated
That's
on
right.
that. And then any ideas you have for truancy, please reach out and let me know.
Okay.
That adds to that as well. Maybe something going on in a home that's causing that low age young people to be truant
Right.
and not coming to school when they're that young. So thank you. Thank you,
Thanks.
Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming in to testify. Very nice to hear you today. So in reference to your comment on school discipline and reform, I guess you were talking about trying not to suspend students that are in especially lower grades, like first grade and second grade. That's what you mean? What kind of intervention could we have with that?
So perhaps in another hearing, I'd really like to talk
That'll
about
be
that with
fine.
you, or follow up with a one-on-one. The Coalition to Reform School Discipline and many youth advocates had their own suggestions about how to invest more money in mental health services and well-being
That'll be
programs,
fine.
some that could be peer-led.
That'll be fine. Several years ago, I had the opportunity to view the movie with several members of the legislature, Waiting for Superman. And for several years, I asked that the collateral consequences of a criminal conviction be taught in Baltimore City Public Schools. Do you have any comment about that?
I think there's a great movie called Push Out, which I think is a film that we should all be watching in terms of thinking about what happens with the over-policing of Black girls in schools in particular. So I would put that in your Netflix queue. And then the second part of your question, I'm sorry, I didn't write it down.
Would you agree with teaching, let's say, middle school to high school students, something that's called the collateral consequences of a criminal conviction?
Yes.
We have a booklet that they gave us, and I've gotten several of them, give them out in the community. So I don't think that people really know what type of crime they're committing until they get their paperwork once they leave in the courtroom.
Yeah, so that's interesting. I would like to see that material myself. One of the things I know is that, just again, thinking back to Kate Bryant earlier, thinking about what's happening with brain development, understanding long-term consequences is often challenging for some young people. And so thinking about what's the stick rather than the carrot is a challenge when you're working with young people. I'm sorry to use that violent vegetarian metaphor, but I'd like to see that.
I'll
see that.
I'll send you one. Don't get me in trouble with the chairman.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Again.
Yeah, just very briefly about the Choice program. Oh, thank you for what you do and for your humor and saying nice things about the chair, whom we all love. But
I don't even know
anyway,
I said nice things. I said I was ably represented.
But my My question is, what percentage of the youth that are making these poor decisions and committing crimes had disabilities prior to it, or you discover it when talking to them? And also, do you think in any way that of the youth that you work with that have disabilities, do you think in any way sometimes the disability contributes to the crime because of impulsivity issues or something else like that?
Yeah, so thank you so much. If it's noted in the social history that we receive from the Department of Juvenile Services, then our mentors and staff would take note of what the disabilities are, and that we may, in fact, then provide referrals or supports for any kind of services that could be helpful with that. My PhD is in American Studies, so I can't tell you based on my own research about impulsivity and the correlation between disabilities and abilities. But I would say I'm convinced by the kind of research that we see. And part of it has to do with environmental factors, especially in thinking about growing up with so much public violence and how that potentially can contribute to adverse outcomes in life.
Yeah, well, I thank you, but maybe you don't have it and you gotta get it back to me.
I can.
But what percentage of the people in the choice program have disabilities is what I was asking. And also, as an American Studies major, I appreciate your work.
Yes, I think we hail from the same department, in fact. I don't know that we track the disabilities and the various aspects of what we get in terms of the social history. I would have to investigate that further and then follow up with you.
All right.
Delegate Kaufman, thank you.
Yeah, a one-on-one would be terrific. Thank
Okay.
you very much.
Thanks.
Thank you. I didn't want to disappoint you because I knew you knew I was going to ask a question.
I called your name, so you were
That's-
obligated, right?
So I wanted you to know I was going to comply. All right, I probably should have asked this question probably of the last pair who were up, who I think it was the last pair who mentioned that they had tried to make inroads into schools and had not been successful. So I'm really concerned about that. So I would like you to talk about, will you please talk to us about the importance or how you see a relationship between schools and all of these wonderful programs we've heard about today, because there seems to be some sort of isolation.
Right. So if we're thinking about young people who are enrolled in the choice program and young people in the state of Maryland who are involved with systems, education is certainly one of the biggest systems that they participate in 180 days a year, no matter whether you're involved in the youth legal system or not. So our mentors spend a good amount of time going into the schools, and what they experience working with the community school coordinator or school counselor or the teachers or the paraprofessionals or the administration really is on a case-by-case basis, depending upon the region that they're in. The only time choice has in most recent memory been involved with formal relationships in cities, in Baltimore City schools, it's been in the south and southwestern parts of Baltimore City. Excel Academy at Francis M. Wood, New Era, which just closed in Cherry Hill, and then Ben Franklin in Brooklyn as well. So I'd say the work that we do with educators is more based on what the family's needs are and the relationship with our mentors in terms of going to schools. And sometimes they go to schools like to support attendance, and sometimes they go to cheer for a football game after school. So it could be a kind of wide array. I think the ways in which we work with schools to ensure that young people are supported and they have a holistic approach, as we do, rooted in anti-racism, rooted in youth development, rooted in trauma responsiveness. I think that's really key for our ultimate public safety in the state of Maryland. So I think that there's a really strong relationship there.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Right, thank you, Kelly Quinn, for your words today. And we have one last person who's going to be on virtually, and that's Curtis Palermo from Roca, Baltimore. He's going to be on momentarily, and we're going to have, I think, a PowerPoint presentation. So before then, I recognize the Vice Chair to announce her new staffer. Oh, not really new.
Right, not new, returning. I'd like to introduce to some and just let some folks know that he's back. Matt D'Ambrosi has been on deployment for a year, serving our country, and now he is back as my Chief of Staff.
Thank you very much, everybody. I look forward to working with you. I don't want to take any more time, but I'm here to represent the committee and help you guys do your job. I'm very excited, so looking forward to working with everyone.
Great.
You got to be consistent. All right, so are we ready? Okay, Mr. Palermo, you there?
Good afternoon, Chairman. I am. Thank you. I appreciate everyone's time and the invitation to come talk a little bit about Roca. My name is Curtis Palermo. I'm the Executive Vice President of Roca, Maryland, and I'm joined by my colleague, James Timpson, who is the Managing Director for Community Violence Initiatives through our Roca Impact Institute. So I'm going to give a quick overview of our direct service work here in Baltimore City, as well as Baltimore County, and then he's going to talk about the local work we do through the Impact Institute, but then also the national level work that we've been doing. Next slide, please. So we work with 16 to 24-year-olds in Baltimore City, which is where we started in 2018 in Maryland. And in the last year, we've since branched out to Eastern Baltimore County. We're a 4-year intensive intervention. So if a young person is referred at 24 years old, we would then have them until they're 28. They do not get dismissed once they turn 25 years old. And we're really focusing on those young men who are either the most likely to be the perpetrators or the victims of gun violence. And most of those referrals are coming through either the Baltimore Police Department, Baltimore County Police Department, Parole and Probation, the Department of Juvenile Services, and then in the city, we are the referring partner for 16 and 24-year-olds through the mayor's office's group violence reduction strategy. So really, if you're thinking about the population we serve, they're at this kind of acute elevated risk. The young people who have high-level offenses, multiple gun charges, violent crimes, they are not the young people who have been successful in traditional programming. Most, if not all of them, have gone to school but did not complete or dropped out for various reasons. We are getting these young people at a point when they can either continue to do the same things that they're doing, putting themselves in harm's way, being rearrested, being the victims of gun violence or unfortunately homicide victims, or they can do something different. And that's really what we're trying to do with them, is to find them through our relentless outreach. So getting this referral, it's a name, an address, maybe a phone number, whatever referral partner contact information we have. And we're doing door knocks. We're going to these communities across the city and in Baltimore County, and we are trying to engage those young people as quickly as possible. And in FY23, we had just under 26,000 total efforts. So that includes, attempted door knocks. So we went to see a young person, no one was home. A third party contact, which could be anyone who lives in the home, mom, dad, brother, sister, even a probation agent, a police department employee, anyone who we are reaching out to get information. And then those actual contacts, which accounted for about 15%, right around 13,000 actual contacts in FY23. And when we do find them, the goal is to engage them in complete wraparound services. So we're talking about increasing their emotional regulation. So many of them are very reactive, and I'm going to touch on that as well as JT with our Rewire CBT curriculum. And the goal is to meet them where they are, bring them to a safe place here at our building in the city and give them the opportunity to do something different, because so many of them have not had that opportunity and are very comfortable doing the things that they're doing, which have kind of led them to this point. And the way we do that is, first and foremost, physical safety for our staff. And we work with the police departments in both the city and the county. We work with all of our referring partners to make sure that we can safely engage these young people because of the things that they're involved in. We understand that some of them have shot people, some of them have been shot. They're in active disputes with other individuals, other groups, other neighborhoods, certain parts of the city or the county that they're unable to safely travel to. So we have to make sure that when we get that referral, before we're doing these door knocks, while we're servicing them, that we hold safety paramount for all of our staff, keep this building a very, very safe place so that they're comfortable coming here. They know that we have their best interest in mind and that no one here is here to do anything wrong to them or do them harm. Some of those protocols include no cell phones in the building. When they get here, we do take them away. They check them in. We lock them in a box. We pat everyone down. Obviously, as I've mentioned a few times, they are known weapons carriers to the police. Many of them have been arrested for that. So we want to make sure that they're not bringing anything in that they should not. And anytime a young person is coming to the building, regardless of how long they've been in the program, we have a group text where we send out Curtis coming to the building and he has issues with JT. So we need to make sure that JT is not in the building because we don't want a dispute to happen or anything to kind of ripple out beyond Roca into the community because they were in a space when they didn't feel comfortable or one of them had an issue with the other. Then the third piece, which is probably the most important, we are evidence-based and it's all about brain science. We talk about a group of young people who are actively experiencing so many different traumatic experiences. They have experienced, previously, whether it's environmental, whether it's direct trauma to them, seeing things in their neighborhoods, their families, whatever it may be. And we have created a cognitive behavioral therapy-based curriculum to help service them, to help address those traumas and get them to a point where they can do something different. Next slide, please. And when we talk about trauma, it's really important to understand that it's fear that won't turn off. These young men are living in the constant state of fear. They're in that bottom survival brain and they're feeling anxious, scared, nervous. They think everyone and everything is out to get them. And their reaction is fight, flight, or freeze. Something happens and they immediately pull a gun out. Someone says something to them that they don't agree with and they get in a verbal dispute or a physical altercation. They're at home with their significant other and they end up getting in a fight and now they get arrested because they aren't acting out of that thinking brain because they haven't reached that point of emotional regulation where they're able to take an 8 to 12 second pause between what they're feeling, what they're thinking, and that reaction. So through our work with cognitive behavioral theory, which is based on cognitive behavioral therapy, and JT will go a little bit deeper into this, we've created a set of 7 critical life-saving skills that they need, things like mindfulness, acting on your values, flexing your thinking, sticking with an uncomfortable situation and not avoiding it. So that over time, and we have them for 4 years, and the brain science has told us it takes about 18 to 24 months to see a sustained behavior change, which is so important for us to have that much time with them, very intensive engagement, so that they can build up the muscle in the brain and they learn a new way of doing things when they find themselves in these situations. CBT is in everything that we do, from that one-on-one group that we may have between a youth worker and a young person, whether it's a group session where multiple young people are together talking about similar situations, or things like our transitional employment program where the young people are getting paid 6.5 hours every day, Monday through Thursday, and it's almost like CBT in real time. You don't want to show up to work. You don't know how to be in uniform, act professionally. If someone asks you to do something you don't want to do and you still have to do it, this is the time to use those CBT skills and learn that, when you show up on time and you do what you're told, you can string enough time together that eventually we can move you on to unsubsidized employment, which obviously will help them remove themselves from those situations in the streets where they are making money by any means necessarily. Now we can put them on a path to having a career. In addition to that, we do offer GED and pre-GED in-house. We have harm reduction, so if there are substance abuse concerns or domestic violence, we're addressing that. Parenting classes, healing circles. We do have an on-site mental health counselor who comes twice a week, and she can do either one-on-ones in the building, and she's also willing and able to go into the community with a youth worker or a staff to do outreach, to engage with a young person, whoever might be in the household with them, to have those conversations to help the young person, overcome those barriers and boundaries that they might have. The transitional employment program, as I mentioned, the goal is they get through that, they learn how to work. Many of them have never done it before, and then they go into what we call bridge to success. So that is an opportunity for an outside employer to take on, one or multiple young people from Roca, where we pay for it. It's between 45 and 90 days. And that employer gets essentially a risk-free opportunity to see if that young person is a good fit for that position. And about the halfway mark, we have a conversation and we say, is this young person likely going to be hired on? to your company, full-time position. If yes, great, we would continue. And if not, we would then kind of transition them into a different opportunity that is a better fit. All the while having conversations with them, explaining what is going on and the goal of kind of that transitional employment to bridge the success to a career pathway. Next slide, please. So the final slide I'm going to talk about is just some FY23 data that we had. We served just over 400 young people. As you'll see, we were unable to retain 18%. The majority of those who we had to dismiss, which is what we call it when we remove them from caseload, were either the victims of homicides or they were moved out of our jurisdiction. Many of those young people that were moved were because of significant safety issues. So they were either non-fatal shooting victims or there was a concern for them and their family to become shooting victims. So we were able to relocate them into the neighboring counties or out of state when that is possible. A few things I want to touch on, CBT is our bread and butter. That is kind of the thing that we are pushing with every young person, whether or not you have a GED, whether or not you've worked before, whether or not you have substance abuse issues, this CBT really can help them get to that point where they're making better decisions, where they're putting themselves in a position to stay out of harm's way. And 83% of our young people were engaged in some form of rewire, whether it was in the formal class, whether it was with a youth worker on a work crew. And then 77% were engaged in all aspects of programming, as I mentioned, things like the GED, harm reduction, parenting, and so on. Our cognitive outcomes, these are for the young people who we've had for 18 months or longer. 91% saw improved behavioral health, and those behavioral outcomes come from our change assessment. So every 6 months from the time they were referred, that baseline on through the 48 months that we have them, we are doing a change assessment, and we use validated scales that have been proven in their effectiveness. So we're talking about real life events. They're self-reporting, they're sitting down with their youth worker. It's a very robust assessment, but it is one that we have seen prove to be successful and also allows us to kind of shift and adapt our programming when we need to, both on an individual basis and if we're seeing a large group of young people who might need access to other services that we may have not offered. And then the 95% increased emotional regulation, that is the key to that 8 to 12 second pause, between what you think, feel, and do, and keeping these young people at a point where they're not reacting, and really talking about not only emotional regulation, but substance abuse use, levels of distress, looking at the ACEs scores and showing it to them and having that conversation and not hiding the fact that this is a behavior change model, because they need to see it and understand, okay, this might be the trauma that I experienced. We're not judging them for it, but if they can identify it, then they're more likely to be able to address it and overcome it. And then finally, some of our criminal justice involvement outcomes, these are for the young people who have been with us for 2 years or longer, so right at that halfway point of direct service. 72% had no new arrests at all, and then 95% had no new incarcerations. And for our group of young people who, talking about over 95% had some level of criminal justice involvement as either a juvenile or an adult, supervision through Department of Juvenile Services or parole and probation, and the vast majority had some level of detention. Those numbers are definitely a huge success. And the last thing I'll say before I pass it over to JT is, in addition to those direct referrals we're getting from parole and probation, the police departments, and Department of Juvenile Services, we did stand up what we call an after shooting protocol. So in Baltimore City, for any young man between the ages of 16 to 24 who is a non-fatal shooting victim, we are deploying designated staff within 72 hours to complete a door knock and offer ROCA services. Depending on the details of the shooting incident and the situation that the young person's involved in, we may keep them for a 90-day assessment period. Many young people are shot at the wrong time wrong place at the wrong time situation, but because they were shot, they're now significantly higher risk, either because they may be a witness, because now they're carrying a firearm in fear for their life. So we're trying to stabilize some of those individuals, and many, if not the vast majority, do stay with us for the full 4 years, but we wanted to make sure that we were addressing all of those shooting incidents. And on a weekly basis, we're actually meeting with 8 of the 10 area hospitals in Baltimore. It's a standing meeting. We talk about all the shooting incidents. We're case managing any of our difficult past shooting individuals, and we're also at bedside at many of those hospitals to meet individuals who have been shot, to engage with them, to fill out enrollment packets, and to start building that transformational relationship with them so we can, start our path to trust and then their change process. So I'll pass it over to JT.
And if I could ask, we're starting to run a little out of time. If you could keep your remarks succinct, I would appreciate it.
Be very brief. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. All right. We can go to the next slide. We can go to the next slide.
Can you see the slide that's up? It says Rewired CBT by Roca.
Oh, you know what? I'm sorry. I got it. Okay. All right. I'm sorry. So this is our Rewire CBT. This is basically what it is, right? Real quick. Kirk talked about it briefly, but I did frontline work in Baltimore for like over 20 years, working the front line, being involved in a lot of CBI programs and initiatives. And what I understood when Roca first came was that this was different. It was a different intervention that was needed in the hood. And these 7 skills are really what we refer to as 7 life-saving skills that really teach that important level of emotional regulation. But what we decided back then was that it was too hard for us to replicate across the country because Baltimore was a heavy lift. And so in 2021, we started the Roca Impact Institute, which is our training and technical assistance arm. Just quickly, what we do is we train other programs and our best practices, Rewire CBT being one of them. So we train other programs in the use of our Rewire CBT and how to implement it in their community. So in Maryland, we're training all of the Department of Juvenile Services community staff. About 3 years ago when the pandemic hit, they really wanted to figure out how to be better at doing work in the community. So one of the things that we agreed on was that your staff need to be retrained and figure out how to really work with young people in the community. So we've trained almost the whole department now in our Rewire CBT, as well as part of our agreement with the city and our GVRS program. We're also not only the service provider for the 16 to 24-year-olds through the GVRS program, but we're also the training provider for Rewire CBT for that program as well. So we've trained some other programs in Baltimore City and our Rewire CBT and how to actually apply it and use it out in the field. You go to the next slide. The way it was designed to be fully mobile, it was designed to be not your clinical form of CBT. So it's not clinician-based, it's frontline worker-based. Those who have the most contact with young people, which is why it's a therapy, it's a theory and not a therapy, because you don't have to be a licensed clinician. But some of the people that we train nationally, so we work with every town for gun safety, and we train a lot of their national partners across the country in our CBT Rewire. Also, right up the road in DC, we're training Peace for DC, which is all the credible messenger programs across the city of DC who come together, and they have a training academy for their credible messengers so that they know that everybody, even if they work for different organizations, are working off the same script. So we train them as well. Juvenile Services, you've seen that, the Maryland Department of Juvenile Services, as well as we're doing some work with San Francisco right now, some actually extensive work with San Francisco's Department of Juvenile Services, as well as we've trained also DC's DRS, their Department of Juvenile Services. So, I mean, you see the statistics here, you see the numbers here. I won't go too much further in because I know we're pressed for time, but the last thing I'll say is our law enforcement component, which is our Rewire CBT, our Rewire 4, which is really designed to help. The one thing that we know about CBT or using CBT is the dual effect that it's had on not only the young people that we teach the skill to, but it's had a tremendous effect on the staff that actually teach it, because we all come into this work with our own levels of trauma, police departments included. So we designed a skill-based training for police that's only 4 skills. That's 4 of the 7 skills that police identified themselves as the best skills, or the skills that would make the best sense for them and their officers to actually go through. This we adapted to a 1-day training or 8-hour training, and we're trained. We got it approved by the consent decree for Baltimore City. So we're in the process of training Baltimore City Police Department, as well as we've done New York, Boston, Chelsea, Massachusetts. I think in Baltimore we're up to over 2,500 police officers right now that we've trained in this Rewire for. And it's an adaptive version, again, really just to help people understand that, you know, we're more alike than we are different, even though some people, young people have taken the path that they've taken through this Rewire CBT. We can all address trauma that we bring to the work, as well as address the trauma that our young people are suffering as we do the work. You can go to the next slide. That might be it. So I'll leave it. Yeah, I'll leave it there in case they're, you know, leave it there.
All right. We have questions. Delegate Conaway.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you for coming to make your presentation, sir. Under the consent decree, do you know if the juveniles have any additional rights when it comes into a question about contact with law enforcement?
I don't. I can't answer that. I don't know. I'm sorry.
Thank you very much.
Are there further questions? I should say that there was last week, members of the committee visited Roca, part of a field trip to see both Roca and the Baltimore City Detention Center. So some people may have had their questions already answered, I think. Having said that, Delegate Munoz.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm sorry I couldn't make it to that great presentation, but I know we visited you guys on the freshman tour and it was a fabulous presentation. And I'm so inspired by the work that you guys are doing. So I wanted to point out, it seems like you served 417 youth in 2023, just in Baltimore alone. And that is the record for everyone who's come before us today. And so my question was going to be, what was your budget that you did that all with?
Our budget is just over $7 million.
In 1 year?
And annually, yes, correct.
Annually. And then I just talked about people moving out of the area or passing away while they were in your program. And were those numbers included in your retention rate that you shared?
Correct. So that 18% that we were unable to retain, all dismissal reasons are pulled together, and that would be represented there. So deceased, I mean, obviously some were incarcerated long-term, and for us, that's 6 months or longer. So at the time of sentencing, you know, we're staying with them, we're following the case, we'll go to court. But if they get a long-term sentence, they'd be dismissed, moving out of the geographical area. And then there's a very, very small percentage, I can get the raw numbers, but a very small percentage that we may have just lost contact with because for whatever reason, they kind of went MIA, the house is vacant, no one has any information on them, they haven't been rearrested, so we're just unable to find any actual concrete address, phone number, or anyone who knows where they are.
And so all of that was included in the 82% retention rate?
Correct.
Wow, that's phenomenal. Thank you so much.
All right, thank you very much. That concludes the briefing from Roca, and that concludes today's briefing. We've had 3 substantive briefings over 11 hours of comments from lots of different sources on this issue. The next step is crafting legislation, and that's what I know members of this committee are already doing. So there will be that work that will be before us when we come back for the full session, January the 10th. So thank you all very much for attending and watching. We will have more on the legislation a little bit later, but thank you for watching us today. We're adjourned.